Hey guy, how are all of you beautiful people? Hope you all are doing great. And this is the next part of Systematic Shinobi. A period of silence filled the air between Hokage and subordinate for a few moments. Hiruzen seemed to be quite at ease with it, but after a minute of the man saying nothing else after the discussion about Lee and Tsunade, Deki found himself shifting slightly. He wished the old man would stop beating around the bush and get to the point of why he called Deki here after the end of the prelims. Patience is a virtue, you know. The old man commented finally after another minute when he stared to drum his fingers on his thigh, voice casual, idle. Deki rolled his eyes. I'm a shinobi, not exactly a very virtuous person. He replied. He stole, tortured and murdered as a profession. And he was pretty damn good at it if he did say so himself. Perhaps, though, taking a few moments to enjoy some peace and quiet every now and then won't kill you, my boy. The old man shrugged lightly. Still, I suppose we're both going to be quite busy this month, so I best get down to business. To defeat the Huns. Deki prodded, rolling his eyes and crossing his arms. Quite, the Hokage nodded, agreeing with him and not at all questioning the reference. First, let us talk of you training. Finally, some good shit. Deki uncrossed his arms and leaned forward eagerly, the old man having gained his full attention. I see that caught your attention. Sarutobi chortled a bit. Well, first things first, I know you no doubt have quite a few things you want to work on yourself already. How long will you need to complete everything you have on your plate already? That gave Deki a bit of a pause. The old man wasn't wrong. His clones were constantly hard at work and the list of techniques he'd pilfered shortened by the hour. As it was, though, he had over 10 techniques still to learn, and that wasn't taking into account training the wind element or earth element. Not to mention completing the seal to add Shisui's eyes to his own, nor completing the lightning release, chakra mode. But taking those last two out of the running and a week, maybe 2 at the very most. Deki replied. As it was, he thought 2 was a bit of a stretch. Unlike Naruto, he didn't have a Baijua constantly trying to take control of his body and slowing his training down. Also, unlike Naruto, he already knew all he needed to train both the wind and earth elements. Sure, the wind was thanks to Naruto's future self's example, which he mostly had to puzzle out on just vague advice from Kakashi and a bit from Asuma, but that didn't impact Deki. He figured he could train both elements to the limits he knew of in just a few days, 2 maybe 3 apiece, and then get the elemental jutsu down with his clones within a day. Really, the one he figured was going to take the longest singular jutsu-wise was the mysterious peacock method. Then again, I've got some things to take care of as well, he mused. Which could slow him down, a tad depending on his mood. At his explanation, the Hokage stroked his chin in thought for a moment before nodding. I see, he mused. You have 8 days. Deki blinked. What? His befuddlement must have shown on his face because the old man chuckled. Do you think that's unfair of me to demand of you? He asked the boy. Deki stared at him for a moment, before shrugging. Not really. He replied. He was a bit confused, but he thought it was accomplishable. Good, if you did, I was going to cut it down to 6 days. Sarutobi's smile spread into a grin. Sadly, as much as I'd love to take my time teaching you, we're going to have to make it a bit of a rush job. My old student has made it so that I'm going to be very busy, so the time I can set aside for your training is limited. Ah. Fucking snake face. Not only had that bastard made such a big fuss and made it so he'd have to rush everything due to his little hissy fit bitch fest invasion plan, now he was even messing with his gains. I should have just Baijuudama'd him and damned the consequences. Deki growled inwardly. You know, blowing everything that annoys you to kingdom come isn't actually an answer to all the problems that ail you. Isabu commented dryly. Clearly you just weren't using enough explosions then. Deki snorted. The only time a Baijuudama wouldn't work was if a bigger Baijuudama blocked it or stupid hacks like the Kamui. There was a limit to how much chakra even the likes of the Pratapath of the Rinnegan could absorb at once. Hell, if someone did try to absorb a Baijuudama, unless the drain rate was monstrously fast, then the Baijuudama would just explode and render the attempt moot and the user erased from existence. God, he wanted to fire a Baijuudama at a proper target so badly. Isabu sighed. Though, putting that thought aside and thinking back to Pedamaru, did you find out anything useful from that kin girl? Deki asked. A bit hopeful. If she knew of the invasion coming up then. Not much, I'm afraid. Much of what she knew, we already did, Sarutabi replied, dashing his hopes immediately. The most we have uncovered is that the Sound Village isn't actually any normal village and is in fact a series of bases set up all over the elemental countries by Orochimaru, and that he has his own elite guard known as the Sound Four, each apparently having the curse seal to empower themselves with. Sigh. There was a limit to how useless people could be. The real problem beyond that is going by your meeting with him at the bottom of the tower alongside Kakashi. My wayward student is prowling around the village. The old man's smile faded away into a frown. I have no idea what he's up to now, so when I'm not training you, I'll be spending most of my time on vigil for him, though I don't expect him to make a move for a while yet. Deki clicked his tongue in frustration. He was regretting it now. At least a bit. Not using the excuse of gaining knowledge from the curse seal and Orochimaru's soul fragment to let the old man know of the invasion. But, he hadn't changed enough for Orochimaru to alter his plans much. In fact, going by Orochimaru's attitude, the man didn't feel threatened by him at all beyond needing someone to handle him during the invasion, and he seemed to be leaning towards Kimimaro for that role. Nobody Deki couldn't handle. He'd be tough as all hell to put down, but Deki didn't feel too threatened. He'd prefer if it were Kabuto. Honestly, he would be even easier to deal with. The biggest problem to deal with would be Genin if she got called in, but Deki doubted it. Come the end of the Konoha Crush, he wouldn't be able to have a handle on things at all. So he wanted at least to use that to his advantage before it came to the real movers and shakers. Orochimaru, for all his abilities and genius, wasn't a true big fish currently. He was just hard to kill, like a cockroach. Without a body able to handle senjutsu, he'd never become as big a threat as Obito, Nagato and the like. Granted, Deki wasn't a big fish himself currently without Isabu's help. But still, it was regrettable he couldn't have things entirely his way. But then, he was pretty much used to that at this point. Everything he had now was due to his own plans, back-breaking effort and his own guts to see his desires through. Sure, he had the memories of his other life that were truly the biggest help of all. But without the guts and will to go through everything he had, they would have been useless to him. Thankfully, I've recalled Jiraiya and he should arrive by tomorrow morning. Sarutabi broke him from his thoughts. Orochimaru might be able to hide from my scrying through the barrier over the village thanks to his intimate knowledge of the village, but with Jiraiya around he won't risk sticking around and the possibility of a confrontation with us both. Deki blinked. Wait, is that how your crystal ball thing works? He asked. He remembered there was actually a little debate among the fans about how the man's spinojutsu with that thing worked. My scrying jutsu? The old man asked and Deki nodded, yes actually. My crystal ball is linked to the barrier formed by the barrier core over the village, and with it I can more or less look over any part of the village. Well, wasn't that interesting? Not that I actually need it, considering I can see anything in a 10-mile radius if I want, but still pretty cool, he thought. He wondered idly who came up with the idea for it. Now, moving on, Sarutobi waved his hand and sat up fully and stared into Daki's eyes seriously, and it was quite a testament to the old man that he hadn't been serious at all when discussing Orochimaru. Beyond Orochimaru and our upcoming training, I have something I wish to discuss with you. Something more serious than Orochimaru. Instinctively, Daki found himself straightening up out of his slouched position as well and giving the older man his undivided attention. Madara Uchiha, the Hokage said simply. And involuntarily, Daki found his senses sharpening and his breath freezing in his chest. Or, at the very least, the man claiming to be Madara Uchiha Sarutobi continued, I have not been idle since you let me know of this man. Doubtless you already know, but before Naruto, there was another Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi in the village. Years ago, someone interrupted a specific ceremony and released the Kyuubi from her seal and summoned it into the middle of the village. The older man let that revelation hang in the air for a few moments, staring at Daki, gauging him for a reaction most likely. Daki shrugged. Obviously, he replied, I looked into the Kyuubi quite thoroughly for reasons I'm sure you understand, and there were no historic sightings of it attacking anyone or anything since the battle between the Shudame and Madara Uchiha, and considering Hashirama Senju won that battle, it's obvious he had the Kyuubi sealed after it. The funny thing was, he wasn't lying at all here, just omitting some of the truth. Anyone with half a brain and knowledge of the Baijuo and Jinchuriki would come to this conclusion. And it was obvious if the Kyuubi just randomly appeared in the middle of the village, then it must have either been summoned or broken free of its prison. Good, it means I won't have to go into too much explanation on the how or why. Sarutobi's lips quirked up into a small smile before it was replaced once again by a frown. Simply, I'm going to put this out here. That night, this man claiming to be Madara Uchiha, not only got into the village and killed many of our skilled shinobi and extracted a Baijuo without anyone able to stop him, he was also capable of holding back the Yondaime Hokage, the events of that night leading to his death. Daki said nothing outwardly. Though inwardly he couldn't help but roll his eyes at how pathetic Obito was. Literally causing the death of a man who was like a father to him, his wife who was always looking out for him, and then trying to kill their newly born child, just because his crush that never returned any of his feelings died on a mission as a kunoichi. Honestly, he was like a stupid, pathetic, mentally weak child that couldn't accept the reality of the world. People lived and people died. Honestly, he was just throwing the world's biggest tantrum, really. I will be blunt, I am not as strong as I once was, age has taken its toll, Sarutobi admitted. I don't believe I have the strength necessary nowadays to defeat someone capable of what this fake has done. As much as Daki would like for that to be wrong, he knew it wasn't. Obito was capable of fighting not just Kyuubi mode Naruto, but him with Kakashi and Guy backing him up. Daki knew the weakness of Kamui, but even with that he wasn't confident in their ability to defeat Obito currently. Whiny man-child he might have been, but Uchiha seemed to get stronger the more they cried about how unfair the world was and blah blah melodrama blah blah. With your potential, you very well may surpass Minato and myself given enough time. But time is something we do not have. The old man sighed. We do not know where this man is, we do not know when he will strike, only that he has his eyes on the Baijuo, and Naruto isn't a well-kept secret, I'm afraid, thanks to my dear old idiotic friend Danza. Well, you're not wrong. Daki found it in himself to smirk. I'm kind of the shit, Gimme 3 years and I'll be way stronger than you or the Yondaime. Maybe. Honestly, he was sure he could reach that level at least. But Madara and Hashirama's level? That was where the doubt festered. Madara was a fucking monster capable of beating down Byakuya mode Naruto, the 8 other Byakuya, Gaara and Sasuke at the same time. Without his fucking eyes. That guy was a freaking monster. And Deki was terrified of fighting him. Even with Byakuya mode with an amped up Isabu, even with the Sage mode, even with the Sage transformation, even with Shisui's main Gekyu, he didn't think he'd be even close to Madara Uchiha's strength without his eyes, never mind with his Rinnegan or god fucking forbid 6 paths Madara. Quite frankly, if Madara wasn't betrayed and ganked by Kaguya, then he highly doubted Naruto and Sasuke could have beaten him. In fact, if 6 paths Madara fought Kaguya, he was sure Madara would have stomped her ass silly and made her his bitch. Well, we'll see in time I'm sure. Should we have it? Sarutobi rolled his eyes in amusement. Still, the reason I bring all this up, is to make sure we have that time. Deki raised an eyebrow. And how will you do that? He asked, unless you've got a hyperbolic time chamber hidden in the Hokage mountain or something. Sarutobi gave him a queer look, but didn't comment at all on his quip. While quality is always appreciated, quantity has a quality in of itself and there is strength in numbers, he stated. What we need are allies. Powerful allies. Especially with how strained our relations are with Suna. We barely avoided war after the Kyuubi attack when we were weakened with the loss of Minato and many of our Shinobi. The only reason we did was thanks to Minato himself doing a number on Stone and Cloud and the sudden loss of the 3rd Raikage. Allies are good. Deki nodded and said nothing more. After all, it was a given they'd never be allied with Stone or Cloud. Quite. Sarutobi grinned lightly. Cloud are constantly gathering more strength and Stone will look for any chance to undermine us. Our alliance with Sand is shaky at best, which leaves only one. Say what? You can't be serious. Deki gave the older man a deadpan look. Oh, but I am. Sarutobi's grin widened a bit. How though? He asked, gaping at the man and utterly lost. I've kind of got one of their Byakuya stuck in my gut and prancing around like a peacock with a set of their most treasured weapons. So you're aware that you prance around that a peacock, interesting. Sarutobi stroked his chin and mused. He was fucking with him, wasn't he? How the hell would we even manage that? Deki goggled at the man. Last he checked, most Shinobi villages weren't exactly happy to part with a Byakuya and legendary set of chakra weapons. Not to say he was against it. He would happily team up with the foxy babe that was Mitarumi. He just didn't see how it would be possible without handing over his swords and evicting his buddy and then dying in the process. I think you're misunderstanding something. Sarutobi's eyes were positively gleaming now as he corrected Deki, not we, but rather, you. The fuck do you put in that pipe you're always toting around, old man? That must be some good shit. Deki gave him a dry look. I get it, imported from Cusa actually, Sarutobi replied without missing a beat. To be exact though, I'm being fully serious here. Think of it as a test. Making an alliance with a village that will be raging mad at me in particular because of their shit that I've yoinked, is a test. Deki was not following the logic. Honestly, he was about ready to try and dispel whatever funky genjutsu he was in. Had he already lost and was in the infinite Tsukiyomi? Well, that sucked. Indeed, Sarutobi's grin was practically reaching shit-eating proportions now. There is no doubt of your strength for the Hokage position, but others are still in question. I would like to see how you approach a situation like this. Thus, I will assign you this S-rank mission to meet with the Mitsukage and gain an alliance with the village hidden in the mist. Daiki just stared blankly at the man. That was near impossible, to be honest. It would be one thing if it was something approached in the original timeline, but here and now, when he had the Kiba blades and Isabu, they weren't going to be happy at all. Of course, this is not a mandatory mission, Sarutobi spoke up, breaking him from his thoughts before he spiraled into them. You can choose if you want to partake in it or not. He could choose. What do I do here? He bit his lip. The most logical thing to do would be to turn it down. Everything was against him here. What could he even do to convince them? They were actually loyal to Yagura initially and knew of the genjutsu. It's how he died, if I remember right, after it got dispelled. They might be grateful for confirmation, and a common enemy might get some begrudging acceptance. Begrudging wasn't a good standing point for allies, though. It was shaky and liable to end in betrayal. Granted, there was Kubakiri Bocho, Zabuza's blade. He knew where it was and could return it to them as a gift as well. And he did know where a few others were, or at least who had them. But that still didn't seem like a lot. Granted, using my story about Raiga trying to use Isabu could work my favor as well, since he was a traitor to their village, and make it look like me becoming a Jinchu Yuriki was a necessity. His mind whirled in circles. All the while the Hokage and his new sensei just watched him in amusement. Who knew the old man was such a prick? Fucking Hokage bullshit. He knew it would fuck him over, he just didn't realize how soon it would do so. In the end, there really was only one option for Daiki to choose. He accepted the mission. A half an hour later he found himself walking through the streets of Konoha on his way back home. He could have made it back within less than a minute if he wanted, but he was in no rush at the moment and his thoughts were heavy. Maybe accepting it was the wrong choice, he mused, stroking his chin in thought as he absently walked down the street, anyone in his way giving him a wide berth instead of getting in his way. He didn't make room for other people, they did it for him. Still, could have accepting the mission been the wrong choice and the true basis of the test? Perhaps the old man testing or not, if he had the maturity to not choose something beyond him. Neither could have been the right or wrong choice, even he mused. In the end, all that really mattered was results. If he actually made something of his choice, then it clearly wasn't the wrong answer. Daiki sighed, rubbing his forehead. Tricky shit like this are a pain in the ass. I'd much rather just fight head on instead of subterfuge, he huffed. If it helps, I think you made the right choice, Isabu consoled him. While it isn't exactly playing it safe and comes with risks, the rewards outweigh them, and on top of that, accomplishing this will go in your favor as far as merit goes. Besides, you will be the one negotiating from the point of strength and with the advantage and have much to offer them. Not only can you use your made-up story about Raiga to your advantage and return the Kubo Kiri Bocho, you also know where the remaining lost blades are, and Kiri itself also has something of your village as well that isn't any lesser than the Kiba blades. Daiki paused. That was right. He did know where the remaining blades of the 7 swordsmen were. Kiri still had one, Kai's had one, Daiki had one and would return another, and he knew exactly where the other 3 were. Orochimaru had them. So it would be in their best interest to ally with Konoha if they wanted to see them again. On top of that, Ao had the Bakugan. While personally Daiki felt the Kiba blades were far more useful than the Bakugan, and it especially didn't even come close to Isabu, the Bakugan was still highly regarded as one of the 2 best doujutsu in the world currently. And Kiri had stolen one. I can work with this, he grinned. He nodded to himself and picked up his pace, walking a bit faster towards his home, his worries easing up a bit. Things were so much easier when you realized you were the one in the position of strength. Though one thing was still fishy. You'll depart 15 days from now. That was what old man Sarutobi had said to him. It was matter of fact, no room for debate and full of assurance that Kiri wouldn't at all knock them back. Which told him either the old man had some dirt on them to make them comply, or he'd already been in correspondence with Kiri. And considering they were looking to be allies and knowing the old man, Daiki was leaning towards it being the second of those two options. So I have a week of training myself and then I'll be spending 8 days training with the old man before heading to Kiri. Daiki mused. Going by the distance, he could be in Kiri within 3 days, 1 day of on-foot travel and 2 for a boat ride, though if he pushed it he could be there even earlier. Actually, he could probably get there within a day and a half if he just water walked and ran across the ocean to Kiri. If he did that, he could be back in Konoha within a week if the negotiations went well and get right back into the grind and have another good 8 days or so time before the third round of the exams. No time to waste then. Daiki nodded to himself, before abandoning his leisurely pace and disappearing in a blur of speed with the Shunshin. When he arrived at his home, Daiki was surprised to find someone already waiting for him. He half expected Anko to have tracked him down already, but it wasn't her. Instead, it was his cute little white-eyed apprentice who was leaning against the wall around the outside his compound beside the entrance and waiting. "What's up, firecracker?" Daiki greeted her with a grin as he landed. Her white pupil-lacking eyes somehow lit up. Don't ask him how, he couldn't explain it if he tried, but they surely did. As expected of his cute little apprentice. "Aniki." Hanabi greeted him with a nod, a small smile appearing on her face that she quickly smothered a moment later. Not fast enough to hide from his truly glorious eyes though. He ruffled her hair, getting a pout from her, that was quickly hidden as well, before he opened the gate to his home. "Come on in." He waved at her off his shoulder, gesturing for her to follow him. He led her inside and sat down on one of the benches inside the outer garden and gestured for her to take a seat beside him. "So what brings you here?" he asked her. "You told me to come find you after you returned from the Chunin exams." She replied succinctly, sitting down beside him. He did do that, didn't he? Though he wasn't exactly expecting her to turn up literally within an hour of the exam ending. Well, he could respect the hustle. "I did, didn't I?" He nodded, "though if you've come this fast, I expect you've made some progress then." "Yes," Hanabi replied simply, "I am now capable of summoning the giant tiger to my side, though it uses up almost all of my chakra to do so." "Good on you." Daiki laughed, actually quite delighted by the news, and pat her on the head. Sure, the tiger wasn't all that strong prior to the summoning contract, only about as useful in combat as a standard Chunin, and the chakra amount would reflect on the strength and power of the beast, but considering Hanabi was 11 and still had a year or two before she graduated, it was a pretty good feat. He could easily make this girl as strong as a Jonin at this rate by time she graduated. Especially since summoning was such a highly chakra-intensive jutsu, and using it over and over again with her summon to deplete her chakra quickly would make her chakra capacity grow all the quicker. Hanabi, despite the cold front she tried to put up, was unable to hide the small pleased smile that spread across her lips at his praise, and ducked her down a bit to look at the ground and hide her face from him. He chuckled, mood easing up. He'd been in a pretty bad mood up until now, he wasn't going to lie. Not only from Lee and Guy's stupidity and his new pain in the ass mission, but also because he'd learned from old man Third that the rock humper prick that murdered him before had left the village already. Once he found out his team had failed to pass, he hadn't bothered sticking around. He'd been tempted to chase the man down, but thankfully his apprentice was here to cheer him up. "So, how are you getting along with the tiger?" he asked. "Actually, have you named her yet?" "She attacked me the first time I succeeded in summoning her," Hanabi admitted, though father was overseeing my attempts at the time and so easily rebuffed her. "Since then I have managed to get her to at least listen to me, and no, I have not named her." Kind of expected, since it was me who kicked her ass and not you the first time, and her strength will be growing already," Daki mused with a nod. "Still, you're on the right track. The best way to make friends is to kick their asses and show them kindness after that. Establish both your dominance and your compassion towards them in the same breath. It also works on attracting women." Everyone was attracted to power. They feared and coveted it. It was just a basic instinct that all living beings shared. Their very first instinct, after all, humans included, was survival, and the more power one had, the easier it was for them to survive. And if one could not obtain such power, the best option beyond that was to attach themselves to someone who did have that power, and women had an advantage on that front if the one with power was a manly man such as himself. Sure, there was a lot more factors to things like that, and it was generally those of lower character that resorted to things like that, those that lacked sufficient courage and willpower, but he wasn't one to overlook an advantage like that. If women wanted to throw themselves at him because of his strength, he would happily accept them. If they were hot. And for a time before he kicked them to the curb, because few of them would be worth keeping. "Why would I want to attract women?" Hanabi peeked up over his hand to give him an odd look. "I'm a girl," she pointed out. "I don't judge." He shrugged. Which was a lie. He judged people quite often, without shame. But he had to be a positive role model for his cute little apprentice. Hanabi's odd look did not fade, but she said nothing and just sighed before changing the topic. "So what should I do now?" she asked. Training, the grind, the most holy of all topics. Keep up your summoning of the tiger, try and do it every day and exhaust most of your chakra as possible each day and name her. Establish a good relationship between you both," he replied. "Beyond that, you don't need my help with Taijutsu since you train with your father on that side of things. Though on that note, do you know your elemental affinity?" he asked. "I do," Hanabi nodded. "Father had me tested for it as soon as my training began when I was young. Though it is frowned upon in the clan to use elemental jutsu, to reach Jonin status it is a must-know, and as such something all within the Hyuga clan have tested as soon as they begin training from a young age." That was interesting. And chakra conductive paper wasn't exactly cheap. He knew, he'd checked. As expected of the Hyuga clan, though, he supposed, the now most powerful clan in the entirety of Konoha with the death of the Uchiha clan. "Good to know," Daki hummed. "So what's your affinity then, firecracker?" he questioned. "My affinity is of the lightning element, Aniki," Hanabi replied. Daki blinked, before grinning. "Well, isn't that a coincidence? My first natural element was lightning as well," he replied. "Must be fated that you became my apprentice. Or would have been if that dirty bitch Fate actually had the tits to mess with him. But she should know better, lest she get a Baiju Udamar up the arse. Yes, threaten one of the possible omnipotent forces of the universe if they do exist. Such a smart move. I am in awe of your genius," Isabu commented dryly. "Didn't you say fate doesn't exist?" Hanabi questioned with a snort. "I did, and I stand by that. It was just a joke," Daki responded, before grinning menacingly. "Besides, if fate did exist, she'd keep her distance from me, 'cause if she tried to get funky with me I'd make her my bitch. You're such a weirdo, Aniki. Hanabi rolled her eyes, but was unable to hide the small grin that appeared at his words. Cultured, actually, thank you very much, he laughed. Anyway, how about for now, I teach you the first stage when it comes to lightning manipulation, and I might even teach you a jutsu. Okay, Hanabi nodded in agreement. A lightning jutsu would be helpful to pass my inevitable test to become a Jonin in the future, even if I won't be able to use it in battle. And why's that? He raised an eyebrow at her. He already knew the perfect lightning-style jutsu for a cute little Hyuga like her. His lightning style, Elakita, would go amazingly with her gentle fist. The clan would frown on at. Hanabi replied simply. Daki rolled his eyes. No apprentice of mine will have jutsu and refuse to use them, he snorted. If they whine at you for it, you can just tell them I gave you permission as your teacher, and if they have a problem with it, they can come whine about it to me, and then I'll kick their asses and assert my dominance and show them why I'm clearly right and they're wrong. Just another show of his words before on how to go about her partnership with her tiger summon, now just applied to her clan. Sure, okay. Hanabi accepted his words with a shrug. Ah, see, this was why his apprentice was way better than Naruto's. She already listened to him properly. He only had 8 days before Old Man Hokage took over his training, which left Daki with literally only a week to work down the massive list of things he had to learn. It wasn't very long at all. Even with his abuse of the shadow clone training method, it was all but impossible to finish up the entire list. Granted, that was half because a lot of his clones were busy working away at developing the seal to squish Shisui's Sharingan inside his Shinkugan after the breakthrough he'd gotten when he saw Kakashi using the evil sealing method. But even if he'd been able to direct all his clones towards learning the jutsu and such he'd picked up, it would still have been unlikely he could learn them all. And so here Daki found himself now, 7 days later, standing in the backyard of his home, examining his hand. And the crackling aura of blue electricity shrouding it. Lightning release, chakra mode. Perhaps the most important jutsu of all now within his repertoire currently, the jutsu that would go hand in hand with his Baijua forms to increase his fighting ability beyond their limits, and one of the cards he needed for the future if he wanted to stand a chance against some of the monsters that would crawl out of the woodwork later. And unfortunately, incomplete. Daki clicked his tongue in annoyance. Or rather, it wasn't the jutsu itself that was incomplete, but rather he himself. The biggest problem with the jutsu itself was getting the lightning chakra composition right enough to enhance himself, yet at the same time, not fry his nerves. Many of his clones had died rather grisly deaths over the past week in the attempt to master the jutsu. It was no wonder the jutsu was so hard to come by. An average shinobi would have killed themselves in the process of learning this jutsu. The real problem was, there was only so low the output of the lightning chakra could be lowered to, before it became useless as far as enhancements went. No, the real problem wasn't the jutsu itself, but rather, Daki's body wasn't strong enough currently to withstand using the lightning armor without damaging himself. And if not for his innate healing factor from both Isabu and the fragment of gelol within the seal on his neck, he'd at best only be able to use it for a few seconds before his body went numb. As it is, I can use it for about a minute before I have to stop, he mused, cutting off the chakra flow and allowing the crackling aura of lightning to disappear from around his body. Well, that's annoying. Daki rolled his eyes and sat down on his backside, staring up at the sky. It really put into perspective how tough the Raikage and his bloodline was. A's family were known for their stupidly tough bodies and endurance. especially when taken into account how high Daki's own endurance was now. With a thought, he brought up his status screen. Name, Daki Yuria. Age, 13. Chakra capacity, 187,000/187,000, low tier Kij. Strength, 201/. Endurance, 281/. Durability, 201/. Agility, 201/. Taijutsu, 215/500. Ninjutsu, 350/500. Genjutsu, 70/500. Bukajutsu, 140/500. Chakra control, 290/500. Chakra affinities. Lightning, expert lightning flashes. Water, expert the sea parts before you. Wind, expert howling hurricane winds. Fuinjutsu, advanced the breath hitches. 281. It was by far his highest physical stat, and all his other ones had now broken into 200 over the past week of training as well. A milestone for sure. Yet even with that and his durability being over 200, he could only endure the technique for a minute even with what amounted to regeneration. How annoying. Well, only one thing for it, he mused, pushing himself up and dusting himself off. He would just have to continue with the grind. The answer to all things. And well, it wasn't like the lightning armor had been all he had accomplished in the past week. He'd taken the time to properly learn how to use chakra strings, steal that sunglass-wearing douche's chakra absorption technique and even the mystical peacock method and a few others. Not to mention he'd had quite a few clones working on the wind training he remembered Naruto going through, and in the process of learning the lightning armor, he'd ascended to the expert level of the lightning release. Not bad at all, Daki mused. Not bad, he says. Isabu snorted, a technique that has more or less been one of the reasons the Reikij's family has ruled Kumo as their Kijs entirely, and your only problem is you're not tough enough to handle it fully yet. I could have told you that before you even managed to get the technique down. To be fair, that technique wasn't actually that hard to learn. Daki pointed out. It was actually pretty simple compared to some of his other techniques. The real problem with the jutsu was being strong enough to withstand it and the stupidly huge chakra drain from using it. Because it drained chakra rapidly as well, that was for sure. Though that wasn't as big an issue for him thanks to Isabu and his heavenly star seal. It was no wonder only the Reikij and his family used it despite how easy the jutsu was to reverse engineer. Without a body strong enough to handle it and stupid huge chakra reserves, it was more a disadvantage to use than an advantage. Give it a year or so, maybe a year and a half, and you'll probably be able to use it without any drawbacks. Isabu mused. Not too bad a time frame, to be honest. As long as he could use it properly by time Shippuden came around and Akatsuki started to really make their moves, then it was kosher. Besides, it wasn't like it was something he couldn't use at all right now anyway. He could still use it for short bursts here and there if needed and would work well in a pinch. He really wanted to try it out with his Baijua cloak as well to see how stupidly fast he was with it. That'll have to wait, you have a guest. Isabu dashed that idea quickly. Oh well. It sure is troublesome being so popular sometimes. Daki snorted with a shrug. A moment later a shadow descended from above and landed a few feet from him. A familiar voluptuous, tan trench coat wearing purple-haired snake lady. I have a door, you know, Daki commented, raising an eyebrow at her, also a doorbell, which guests are supposed to ring. You also have a really punchable face, but you don't see me busting your nose in now, do you? Anko retorted with a grin. And you have a spankable ass, but you don't see me leaving my handprints on it, he shot back. Besides, not that you could even if you wanted to. Daiki added. Probably. Well, she most likely could while he was in his base and he fought her with no enhancements. Anko wasn't exactly a one-trick pony like Kurenai, she was the one-time apprentice of Orochimaru for a reason. He knew for a fact that she was not only skilled in taijutsu, but genjutsu and ninjutsu as well. He knew she was at least proficient in fire style as far as jutsu went, alongside knowing some forbidden jutsu. Not like you don't want to with how much you were drooling over me before, brat. Anko fired back, grin widening and not at all fazed about his comment about her ass. In fact, she proudly cocked her hip to the side, and we'll be seeing about me punching your face in now anyway, since it seems you're not all that busy. That you know of, he said mentally. Even right now he had a good 100 or so shadow clones within Isabu's personal dimension grinding away. Though at least 50 of them were working on his new seal. Now that he thought about it, he'd need a name for his new seal. Bloodline grinder seal maybe, he thought idly. No, Isabu vetoed him immediately. Killjoy. I honestly expected you to turn up here a while ago. Daiki dropped the banter and got down to business. I wanted to, but you obviously had some shit to work on. Anko shrugged. As desperate as I am to get rid of this shitty seal, I've dealt with it for like a decade at this point. I can manage a few extra weeks. And since I look to be taking a break, you decided to pop over now. He pointed out. He'd caught her watching him over the past week while he trained, though she hadn't approached beyond watching him for a bit and then leaving. That, and by the looks of it, nobody else is coming by today like your little Hyuga minion. Anko replied, shamelessly not trying to hide at all that she'd been keeping an eye on him. Apprentice. He corrected her. Hanabi had really grown on him and she practically hung on his every word. She'd came over every day since the end of the exams to train with him. The only reason she wasn't over today was she had training today with her father apparently. Beyond her, nobody had really visited him. Tenten came over for a bit to let him know she'd be pretty busy helping Neji with his training because he couldn't rely on his clan, and Guy was left unmentioned, though he was probably busy with Rock Lee. And Sasuke came over for a bit to let him know he was going off somewhere to train for Kakashi and probably wouldn't see him again until the exams. Most likely Kakashi was getting him ready for the possibility of facing Gaara and teaching him the Chidori. Though, he had no idea what was going on with Naruto in that regard. Either or could have a decent shot at facing Gaara first. Hopefully he didn't just get parked with Ibisu. Granted, Ibisu would be a way teacher for him than Kakashi for preparing. He just hoped it wasn't like that because of how neglectful that would be on Kakashi's part. Sure, Anko shrugged off his correction before looking around the backyard. I gotta admit though, this is a pretty swanky place. How'd a kid like you afford a place like this? Some luck and a lot of effort, Daiki replied. Most of the money came from the bounty for Reiga Kurosaki, and Sasuke owns this entire district since he's the last of his clan. He gave me a good deal since we have an epic bromance and all. Anko blinked. Oh yeah, you did kill that guy, didn't you? She tapped her chin, then smirked at him, but the Uchiha Kid ha. He is rather pretty for a guy, something you'd like to share. He's my male boo, nothing gay about it, though if he were a chick he'd probably be hot as shit. Daiki shrugged. He was comfortable enough with who he was to admit Sasuke was a good-looking guy, and as a chick would probably be a hottie like his mother, he'd hit that for sure, but as far as sharing goes, since you seem to like my house so much, I can give you a personal tour if you like. I recommend my bedroom and my bed. I'm good for now, thanks. Brat Anko laughed. I'm sure I'll see enough of it once you deal with this seal of mine. She shrugged. Was it right of him to entertain the idea of bedding her when he was already possibly going to be in a relationship with Tenton? I guess as long as it happens before I get together with her, it's free game, he shrugged. Instead of letting any of his inner thoughts on the matter show, Daki stroked his chin. I should probably reinforce my bed with seals. He mused aloud and grinned wickedly at the purple-haired woman. Have at it, Anko shrugged, not at all bothered by the implications of his words. Like I said, if you deal with this seal for me, you can do whatever you want with me. You can try and blow my back out and make me walk bow-legged for a month if that's what you want. Damn, this woman was something else. Somehow, the way she treated it so casually that she was used to his heart's content as long as he upheld his sign of the bargain, was really sexy. Was it the submission of such a strong, beautiful, confident woman? Maybe. He put it out of mind for now, no use letting that thought distract him. Right now, it was time to partake in something much more amazing than mere sex. It was time to grind. All right, so how we going about this then? Daki asked. Let's just fight, Anko replied. It'll be easier for you to get a feel for at least partly how my old bastard of a teacher fights through fighting me. I'll show you everything he taught me, then later I'll run you through learning the shit yourself. Daki's lips twisted up into an excited grin. Now you're speaking my language. Funny, I thought your language was more along the lines of, oh Daki-sama, you're so big. Anko snorted. I'm multilingual, Daki fired back. Good to see you're learning it for later though. You're something else, you know that, brat. I could say the same about you. The pair of them, Daki and Anko, were currently seated in a private booth at the back of a small dango shop. A favorite of the snake users. Anko sat directly across from the teen, lounging across the soft upholstery. The booth was large enough to sit 4 people, on either side of the table within, large enough that the purple-haired woman could lean back comfortable, one leg crossed beneath her while the other was up fully so she could lean on it with one arm as well. Her other hand was currently occupied with multiple sticks of dango. Honestly, it was a very unladylike position, and would let anyone that looked get a full view up her skirt if they wanted. Not that Anko seemed to care. Daki wasn't one to turn a free show down. Well, he was off, it was some ugly motherfucker. But Anko was not. She was hot as sin. The purple-haired woman cracked her neck with a slight jerk of her head and a small hiss. You don't hold back at all, even when it comes to chicks you want to fuck, huh? Anko asked. That was nasty. If I wasn't as limber as I am, that could have done some real bad damage. She was talking about how he ended the fight. It wasn't anything special or anything. He just grabbed her by the neck and throttled her before lifting her up by it and slamming her into the ground. Anko wasn't Orochimaru's former apprentice for nothing though, and only ended up with a stiff and sore neck, whereas most others would have probably gotten whiplash at least. Daki pulled his gaze up from the depths of her short skirt and shrugged as he met her eyes. What can I say? I'm a big believer in true gender equality, he smirked. Besides, I would have healed you if you got hurt bad anyway. The fuck is gender equality? She raised an eyebrow at him before shrugging. Actually, never mind, knowing you it'll be something stupid. Ha, gender equality, that's almost funny. It probably was to her. You can't hit her, she's a girl. If someone said that, they'd get laughed the shit out of, at best in this world. At worst the woman they tried to protect in that case would stab them in the back. Because, you know, kunoichi. Anko herself was probably stronger than a good 90% of the population of this world, possible more. Honestly, putting the banter aside, the fight with Anko really was something else. He'd fought her in his base form for the vast majority of the fight. And he'd been the one at a disadvantage. Even with his stupidly huge and ever-growing endurance, a mere 3 hours apparently wasn't enough to tire out the former apprentice of a Sanin. If Anko hadn't prodded him into using his heavenly star seal so she could get a good up-close look at it, he would have quite likely lost that spar. Anko was faster than him, more experienced and just flat-out more skilled than he was currently. Not to mention, one of her main fortes in a fight, was one of the few things he had trouble dealing with. Poison. Many poisons actually. She could literally breath out various different poisons from acidic, to paralyzing and just flat-out toxins. Apparently, she had been exposed to many poisons when she was the apprentice of Orochimaru, even some he'd flat-out created and gained an immunity to them, allowing her to incorporate them into her poison mist jutsu. Man, that thing was nasty. With his Shinkyugen, he was able to learn how she manipulated her chakra to create the poison mist and with training, get the jutsu down himself. But it would be a double-edged sword as long as he wasn't immune to the poisons he created like she was. Definitely something to look into. You're going to poison yourself with dozens of different types of poisons, over and over again, aren't you? Isabu asked, voice deadpan. The grind cannot be denied. Deki replied. And that was all. He would neither confirm nor deny that question. But yes, he most likely was probably going to do something along those lines, though he'd definitely need some help with it. So Anko broke him from his thoughts and looked him dead in the eye. Beyond the real nasty stuff that would hurt me using, I showed you pretty much what that slimy bastard taught me. That was for sure. More or less. She didn't summon Manda for instance, which she could do. But then, he didn't exactly hold that against her. Manda was a pain in the ass. Strong as all fuck, gargantuan and honestly, really cool looking. But, personable and a team player, he was not. God, he was so lucky his chameleon summoners were such chill peeps. I'll need to watch out for that freaky substitution. Deki mused. At one point, he'd broken out the lightning armor for a test during the fight and took Anko by surprise. He gave her a hell of a beating in the process and thought he had ended the fight then and there. Only for her to literally shed her own skin. He hadn't known she could do that. Orochimaru's very own variation of the substitution jutsu that he thought only Sasuke and Kabuto had learned in the original timeline. But apparently Anko knew it as well, and it was one of the techniques that went a long way to making Orochimaru as slippery as he was. And it didn't need something to switch with to be used. Probably not, while it isn't massively chakra draining. It costs quite a bit more than your standard substitution, Anko pointed out. She seemingly remembered quite well that the fragment of Orochimaru in her seal had a massively lot less chakra than the original, so, what do you think? She asked, getting to the main meat of the discussion right away. Instead of answering her straight out, Deki arched an eyebrow at her challengingly, that desperate to get into my bed, huh? He teased. Anko rolled her eyes, well, you know, totally dripping wet for you and all that, she snorted. One thing he'd learned about Anko though, was that she wasn't the type to back down from a challenge, and she had no problem egging him on to get what she wanted out of him. She sat up straight facing him directly and shucked her large tan trench coat off her shoulders, leaving her torso more or less bare, only covered by dark fishnet mesh armor. It hid the color of her skin and her nipples, but hid nothing else. the mesh molding to her curves like a second skin and doing nothing to hide the large, perky smooth roundness of her breasts. Breasts which Anko then cupped in her hands and pushed up, making them look even bigger, and shook her hands, jiggling them at him. "You've got a massive cock on you, brat. It would make a great pair with these big ol' tits of mine. I can't wait to wrap them around it." Screwing Kyoin silly had done a lot to take the edge off for him being surrounded all the time by gorgeous girls, but, edge off or not, there was no stopping his blood from flowing south at the sight. She gave him a wicked smirk when his back straightened. "Course, with how big it is, even these fat tits of mine probably won't be able to take care of all of it," Anko mused, voice glittering with a taunting, teasing edge. "Guess I'll just have to put my mouth to good use then to get the rest, huh?" She stuck her tongue out and licked her lips. Her oh so very long tongue. "All right fine," Daiki conceded, and stood up. "Let's go," he said. He pointedly ignored the way his pants were tenting out at the crotch, massively, as if someone had stuffed a spear inside. That caused her to pause and blink, a little confused. "Go where?" Anko asked. "My place," Daiki replied simply and gave her a hungry stare, eyes having trouble deciding on where to look between her now glossy lips or huge tits. "I'm gonna kill your sensei, again." He didn't really need to see any more of her fighting ability thanks to the Shinkyugen enhancing his mental perception and memory. And with the training over the last week, the lightning armor, his heavenly star seal and Isabu. Yeah, no way the shard of Orochimaru was going to be able to do much. Anko blinked, staring at him for a moment, before promptly shooting to her face, excitement palpable. "Now we're talking." She cheered before smirking at him. "Honestly, brat, we could have taken care of this ages ago, during the break at the prelims even." "Probably," he agreed. "Doesn't hurt to be careful though." "Yeah, well it definitely hurt your enjoyment time." Anko's smirk widened and she sauntered over to him, hips swaying. "You could have been fucking me cross-eyed and making me squeal your name for near 2 weeks at this point." And to punctuate what she said, she turned around to pick up her coat, and bent fully over, even though she had no need to. Her skirt rode up on her full round ass and she wiggled it from side to side, taunting him. "How the hell are you a virgin?" Daiki honestly couldn't help but ask. Though asking that didn't stop him from whipping his hand out and smacking her across the ass, hard. A loud clap sound echoed through the room and Anko moaned. She wiggled her ass again as if asking for more, before looking over her shoulder and giving him a smoky look, cocky smirk still brazenly in view on her face, "Because nobody's been worth it until now." That didn't answer the subtext of his question at all. "That reminds me," she blinked, "I heard from the old man you have a real important mission coming up, huh?" Even as she asked that, Anko continued wiggling her full round ass at him. "Weird that he told somebody. I thought he'd keep it a secret for now," Daiki thought but shrugged it off. "Something like that," he nodded. "Though is that something you should be asking right now?" Daiki asked, pointedly looking at the spear-like shape straining his pants. "Yeah actually," Anko's smirk returned in full. "He asked me if things worked out with the cursed seal and all, if I wanted to play the escort and bodyguard role when you head it." "I don't need a bodyguard," he replied on instinct. "The Hokage himself gets a guard detail and escort when he leaves the village, especially for something like this, so yeah, you're getting one. Doesn't matter how strong you are, brat," Anko replied, and finally stood up, hiding the temptation that was her bouncy backside, behind her once more, though now her tits only covered by mesh were practically in his face again. "Seems he wants me to try and keep your hormones on a bit of a leash for this mission." "What?" Anko pulled her coat on, partially hiding her torso and much of her cleavage. Daiki was both relieved and disappointed by that. The new Mitsuki's a greater looker. Seen a picture of her myself once. Anko shook her head and gave a faint impressed whistle, and the body on her, phew, I don't blame the old man for thinking you'd be hard up for her, even I'd be tempted to get a piece of that cake. Well, the discussion here and now at least helped him control his raging desire to bend Anko over right here and now and make good on that whole, fucking her cross-eyed and making her squeal his name thing. What? Is the old man hoping that if I fuck you enough I won't be tempted to betray the village and join the mist if the Mitsuki offers to ride my dick if I turn traitor? Daiki asked sardonically. Well, yeah, Anko shrugged, unashamedly, you're an impressive guy, brat, but the problem with you actually reining in your hormones is the fact that it's all the harder to do when babes like that actually throw themselves at you. Fuck, you're literally going to fight and kill one of the Sanin just because you want to bounce me around on that cock of yours, much less chakra or not, that's still Orochimaru. Getting mixed signals here, you know, you're the one saying I should have splattered Shade Pedamaru ages ago. Daiki pointed out. Anko shrugged, not saying I didn't, just that it doesn't change how crazy that is. She shook her head. Fighting freaking Orochimaru because you want to fuck me, you're a crazy ass kid. A crazy ass kid that you're gonna be calling daddy not long from now. Daiki snorted. Anko dropped the Mitsuki discussion then and grinned back at him. Sounds like a fun time, daddy. She wiggled her eyebrows. This woman was seriously going to get it. After paying their bill at the dango shop they left the building behind, which was really more Anko's bill than Daiki's, because man did she eat a lot of dango. Well, at least he knew where her massive knockers came from, they were sponsored by dango. They headed for his home after that, and as soon as they were over the threshold, Daiki wasted no time in activating the multitude of seals he'd placed over the property. Well, the ones that weren't already active. He wasn't really sure if chakra would leak or not, or if it would even be strong enough to be felt from any distance, but he sure as hell wasn't taking any chances. Orochimaru was lurking out there, somewhere. He could be in the village right now. Odds were, he was not, but it paid to be safe than sorry. So he had the seals on his property masking any chakra fluctuations, so on the off chance, Orochimaru or one of his agents would never sense his own chakra. And get an inkling that he could actually do this, which would put Sasuke in danger. All right, Anko looked around the main garden out front as he closed the gates to his property and finished activating the seals. So how do we go about this? Do you need to draw up a seal or something? Usually something like that, Daiki replied with a shrug. Focusing the consciousness into a seal wasn't exactly a low-tier skill. I don't need that though. Let it be said that the benefits of being a Jinchuriki seemed to be never-ending. He had the innate ability already to project himself into his own seal thanks to the connection between him and Isabu, and he could apply it to others as long as there wasn't something blocking him from getting in. And he was pretty sure he could get in with his eyes as well at this point. Anko raised a brow at him. That right? She asked, how come? He grinned, jabbing a thumb at his chest. Cause I'm the Sanbi Jinchuriki-sama baby, I'm a natural-born Badis. He boasted. A natural-born head case more like. Isabu snorted. That too. Who? The purple-haired special Jonin replied dryly. So where to then, out here, or out back where we sparred? Doesn't really matter, Daiki shrugged. The fight will take place on the mental plane and won't really affect the physical one, so we may as well be comfortable and go sit on my awesomely comfy couch. Honestly, this is kinda surreal, you know. She laughed, relaxing on the couch while getting rid of the thing that's been tormenting me for years. You really know how to throw a girl through a loop, don't ya? Never let em know your next move. Daki's grin widened, before beckoning her to follow him inside. Isabu's clone was still inside the pond having a lovely old time, and would keep an eye out if anything happened around the premises, as always. Anko whistled as they entered the main hall. Is this mahogany? Do you know how much this crap costs? She asked, admiring the walls of the hallway. Really does pay to have a lil Uchiha but buddy ha, brat. Pays to be awesome you mean? Daki wasn't really fazed. Homosexual jokes were as old as time where he came from, or at least much older than he was. It took a man comfortable in his own sexual orientation to discuss the looks and such of other men. He'd definitely make a hot chick though. I do wonder though, do you think Sajuko would be stacked or slender? He mused aloud. Anko gave a barking laugh. Stacked, she answered, rather swiftly at that. Dunno if you ever saw her, but the Uchiha kid's mother, Mikoto, was a real looker and she could have given me a run for my money when it came to tit size. You'd think she was part Hyuga. Those tighty whitey eye chicks are always sporting massive racks, though not that I need to tell you that, ha. She gave him a knowing look. Ha, good to know, Daki mused, before shrugging. What a lost opportunity. Too bad Sajuke's not a chick, though a bromance isn't bad either. In fact, it's probably better to have a bro. There's tons of stacked chicks about here anyway. Shame about Mikoto though. And Kushina obviously. That would have been an amazing threesome, something worth bragging about. Banging the mothers of 2 future demigods, or gods. You know, it actually wasn't all that clear. Kaguya was a dimension creating and destroying, planet wiping bona fide goddess more or less. And Naruto and Sasuke beat her, with help sure, but they beat her. And they, or at least Naruto, had access to the creation of all things. Come that point, he could create objects from his chakra, stop the gate of death from killing Guy, create literal new eyes in the eye sockets of people and connect them without issue and more. Were Naruto and Sasuke gods themselves by the end? They at least had the abilities of one's literal creator god Naruto. Fuck, just remembering the monsters that would come later was beginning to make him antsy. A tap on his shoulder broke him from his thoughts and he looked over his shoulder to see Anko giving him an odd look, almost concerned. Yo brat, you okay? She asked. You just zoned out there and got all quiet, even stopped walking. Oh, right. This totally wasn't the time to be focusing on that. Besides, he still had a few years to grind until his muscles could flex upon a god. Yeah, I'm good, just thinking about something that came to mind there. He waved her off. Come on, it isn't really important right now. Ahoo. Anko's raised eyebrow told him. She did not believe him. Daki ignored it and led her on, through the halls and to his living room. Damn, I have to admit, you have good taste, kid. Anko looked around his living room, to the large fireplace, soft shag carpets, expensive furniture, large television, dimmer lights, the works. Kids who have place of their own at your age, generally live in pigsties, but look at you, living your best life, huh? What do you think you're here for? Daki teased with a smirk, good mood returning as a sense of pride filled him. It maybe wasn't all that big of a thing to take pride in compared to being able to fire off a massive energy bomb that could wipe out thousands in an instant. But, he'd always been an orphan. Twice over, in fact, both in this life, and his other. He'd never had a proper home to call his own. His dingy little apartment didn't count. He didn't even like inviting people over there previous to moving in here. So he put a lot of effort into building up his home into a living space he could be proud of. And while he hadn't gotten everything he wanted so far, a lack of gaming consoles being amongst the things missing in his sweet pad, he'd done some good work here. And he was proud. The garden and pond is nice, I do admit. You did good work with that. Isabu praised him. The giant turtle boy did like his pond, that was for sure. You have your lusting after females and precious grind, I have relaxing in some nice water, we are not the same. Isabu pointed out. Anko snorted, is that what the shag carpets are for? She asked in return, bending down to run her hand through the fabric. It's really soft and cushiony, making sure we don't hurt our knees, huh? Not really, he just liked shag carpets. He'd always hated wooden flooring or tiled flooring growing up because of cold mornings on his bare feet. Shag carpets were nice, soft and warm. But he wasn't going to tell her that. That was for sure. You don't seem all that bothered by it, Daki pointed out. In fact, I'd say it's a bit off that your mind went right there first. I've got no illusions to what's gonna happen soon, kid. Once this seal is taken care of, or is the little games we've been playing not been clue enough? Anko rolled her eyes, and you're gonna have free reign with me, no way for a second I won't believe you aren't gonna have me between your knees and sucking your dick all submissive like. I mean, you're not wrong. Daki shrugged, lamely. Exactly, Anko huffed in amusement, I bet Q and I got the same treatment, right? Pretty much, he nodded, though not really in here, we spent most of the time in my bed, all she did in here was strip and give me a little show, shaking her ass for me, before I fucked her on the couch and dragged her back to my room. That sounds awfully boring, Anko pointed out, raising an eyebrow at him. I mean, I know she's a cold fish personality-wise, but ouch. That explanation was drier than any little boy's ass crack. My old sensei has slithered his way up inside. Daki almost shivered in sympathy for Sajuk. Not his Sajuk, of course, because no way was Orochimaru getting anywhere near his buddy's ass crack, but Sajuk from the other timeline. Poor guy. There had to be a reason for the butt rope, surely. And Daki knew his buddy well enough to bet that if he offered a really powerful jutsu in exchange that would help him kill Itachi, Sajuk use Naruto's sexy jutsu if asked. His buddy ol' bro really was broke. I'll need to fix him. Daki nodded to himself, before turning his attention back to Anko. The dirty talk was pretty boring, I do admit, it was basically all the same thing. The submissiveness was great and doing whatever I wanted with her even better, but she didn't have much going on upstairs to formulate some good old words. It may have been his ego talking, but he sure did love the idea of girls squealing out lots of dirty talk about how great and amazing he was. Some would call that a coping mechanism for hiding from your own insecurities, but I won't. Isabu commented. He just did though. Alright, so he needed the hype to keep going and make even himself believe his own boasts and making his plans work out. He was self-aware enough to know that, even if he pointedly ignored it and lived in his own little illusion, he needed to believe he could accomplish what he needed to, otherwise it would be impossible. Taking Kaguya out of the equation, Madara was a monster, capable of defeating the raging Kage with ease, slapping around all 9 Baijua, alongside Naruto, Sajuk and Gaara, a Kage, with little effort. Without the Deus Ex Machina that was Ashura and Indra's souls being attached to Naruto and Sajuk and being able to give them a power-up boost, nobody currently alive in this world stood a chance against even mortal Madara, never mind 6 Paths Madara. Regular old Daki and Isabu could never defeat him. But, it was a different story for the legendary Sunbi Summer Grind Master Daki, who grew stronger every day, learned new techniques as he breathed and was so amazing and powerful people bowed in awe, women gushed for at the crotch and enemies bent over and prepared for an anal violation because they knew they could never escape his awesome legendary prowess. That was the kind of figure he had to be, to defeat Madara. Because in the end, even with the powers of Ashura and Indra, Naruto and Sasuke were still at a disadvantage against Madara. If not for Kaguya ganking him, he probably would have won. Thankfully, Daiki's heavy mood didn't last for long and he was able to bury the thoughts to the bottom once again. Women were a man's greatest coping mechanism, and he had a hell of a woman right beside him. Ha, how sad, Yuhai really failed to deliver fully ha. Anko shook her head and clicked her tongue, how disappointing, but really, it's Yuhai after all, she's a bit of a lush. She then shrugged her coat off, draping it over the arm of his couch and leaving her only in her tight, short orange mini-skirt that came down to mid-thigh at best, and her mesh top, the contours of her large, perfectly shaped breasts obvious to his eyes through the mesh. She gave him a toothy smirk, crossing her arms under her huge breasts and pushing them up, making her mountainous cleavage swell to ever greater depths. So how we doing this then? Anko asked. Blood rushed south and all thoughts from before were swept over by the wave of red that shot down. Daiki licked his lips, and walked past her to sit on the couch, spreading his legs a bit. I just need access to the seal, so why not come have a seat here then? He pat his lap. Anko stared at him for a moment, before grinning impishly. All right, Daddy tilde. She rolled the word with her tongue and fluttered her eyelashes at him. It was almost a bit odd to see such an act on such an abrasive, confident and strong woe. Anko reached down, grasped her mesh shirt at the top of her skirt, and promptly pulled it up over her head in one motion, leaving her torso bare. Large, creamy breasts jiggled into view, tapped with small, juicy pink nipples, and Anko then proceeded to skip over to him, making those huge melons bounce deliciously on her chest. Then turned and deposited her full, luscious rear into his lap. You know that does bring up the question, Isabu mused before he could truly take in and enjoy the sights and the feeling of this gorgeous woman in his lap. You are looking to empower your allies for later as well, when we crush this shard of Orochimaru. Do you want its chakra for your own, or shall we give it to Anko to empower her? For you, it would be a few weeks of effort, but for her, it would be months of hard work at least. What brought up that question though? Madara. Isabu supplied helpfully. Honestly, it was kind of hard to really think that through properly at the moment. And not because he was all that hungry for more of Orochimaru's chakra for a decent boost. But again, because of the gorgeous, voluptuous, half-naked bombshell currently situated in his lap. Who not too subtly began to grind her full ass into his crotch. Grind, such a beautiful word. It could encapsulate not only his pursuit of strength and ever-constant growth, but the wonderful motion of her delicious rear end gyrating against him. Beautiful and powerful all in one. Well, at least we know what word you're not allowed to say around Father's crimson gourd. Isabu deadpanned. True. But that was all the mental power he could spare for that line of thought at the moment. He had to focus on other things. You know, I was kinda expecting you to cop a good feel before we got right into. Anko leaned into him, back resting against his chest, and began teasingly. But was cut off by his hands winding around her waist and coming up to cup her large breasts. They were so soft his hands just sunk into them, yet springy at the same time, and despite their sheer size and weight, so perky. Kunoichi really would be hated by women back in his other life. Heh, there you go tilde. Anko chuckled throatily. Get a good feel of these fat tits of mine and get real motivated, kid. They are all yours once you deliver on your end of the deal. I'll get right on that. Daiki promised. But, he couldn't just leave things like this, now could he? Not after she'd gotten him all riled up. It wouldn't be fair if it was him alone. He had something in mind just for her. Something Genin served as a practice dummy for and he perfected over the last week when he finally got a hold of the lightning chakra mode. He filled his hands with her full tits greedily and molded them back. At the same time Daiki caught her lovely cherry nipples between the two main fingers on each hand and used all of his mighty grind-enhanced willpower to focus in this one moment and not let the sexy that was on his lap distract him. Sparks crackled over his hand, and directed straight into Anko's nipples as he pinched them. A surprised squealing moan left Anko's cocky sexy lips a moment later. Femme fatale she may have been, of the highest order really. But, she was still a virgin in the end. Holy fuck. She moaned loudly, spasming in his lap. He stimulated the nerves in her sensitive nipples with his lightning chakra for a few seconds, a good 10 really, before releasing her nipple. Not plural, only the one, and trailed his hands down from her large breast, down her flat smooth stomach and under her tiny orange mini skirt. Mesh and fabric blocked his way a bit, and would have made it hard for anyone else but him to find. But the scarlet eye saw through all, and was a mighty fine tool in finding the legendary clitoris. While he stimulated one of her breasts with electricity, he pinched her clit with his other hand, and did just the same. Anko went absolutely wild, bucking and gyrating crazily, her shouts of pleasure turning into one long drawn-out moaning squeal, and he could feel as the fingers under her skirt became drenched with her fluids as she squirted out some of that happy woman juice. When he finally let go, she collapsed against him, limp, breathing heavily. Shit, no wonder High ended up like a fish, that was crazy. Anko murmured in a daze, every few seconds, a shudder running through her body as pleasure spasmed through her. It took her a decent little bit to gain enough motor function to look over her shoulder at him. Was that lightning chakra? Where the hell did you learn to do that? Practicing with Genin. Daiki grinned at her smugly, a flush of manly pride burning in his chest at the slovenly look on her face. And if you think that was crazy, just wait till I do it while I'm fucking you senseless with my cock. Anko shivered. Shit, that'll be insane, she admitted, before a grin spread across her face just like his own. Maybe we should just throw you at female prisoners at the T&I, that'd be a riot. Honestly, this woman really had zero compunctions with basically doing anything to enemies of Konoha. The voluptuous snake mistress licked her lips. Before they get a taste of that though, you'll be wrecking me first, I guess. Ha ha, not sure if I'm dreading it or looking forward to it now after that. The power of smugness compelled him to lean forward and capture her lips with his own, his tongue smashing into hers and beating it into submission. When he pulled back, there was another flushed, dazed look on her face. And fuck did it make him just want to hook his hands under her knees, lift her up and force them up over her head and fuck her silly right here and now, full Nelson style. His cock pulsed at the thought of carrying her over to a mirror and making her look herself in the eye as he fucked her cross-eyed. First I have to take care of something though, he forced himself to calm down. For the moment. I'm going inside you now, Daiki declared. It took a good few moments before he managed that. Or rather, he was so pent up, he couldn't focus on the process at all and utterly failed multiple times in a row. Fumbled it really. So Isabu took it upon himself to do the heavy lifting on that part himself and complete the bridge. But he had it way easier than Daiki obviously, since he was already inside a mental plane and was predisposed to being good at it with all his experience being sealed and all. You keep telling yourself. The towering form of Isabu deadpanned at him from above. They were currently inside Daiki's own seal space. Isabu had smartly decided to bring him here first upon connecting to Anko's seal. to prepare before heading into Anko's and confronting Orochimaru. "Get ready, I'll open the connection in a moment," Isabu said seriously before he could reply. "Do not give him any chance to counter, go 100% and more from the get-go and destroy him before he can do anything." "You say that like I planned on anything else." Deki smirked, facing towards the connection. "Really, it wasn't anything grand, it was just manifested as a large metallic door at the edge of the sealed space." He wasted no more time and got right down to it. First, he focused on the seal on his neck. It pulsed and opened up, spreading lightning bolt-like marks out across his body. Second, he focused on his connection with Isabu. A moment later, familiar crimson-red chakra bubbled into existence around his body, forming into a cloak with 3 thick swaying chakra tails behind him. But he wasn't just done there. With his 3-tailed cloak and heavenly star seal enhancing him massively, he focused on his own chakra personally. His chakra sparked into lightning and spread over his body, filling his crimson-red chakra cloak with sparking bright blue bolts of power. "It hurts," Deki noted. Even in his mental body, God, it fucking hurt really bad. And if not for Isabu helping him out a bit with controlling his chakra, he wouldn't even be able to stack these 3 together right now. It was only in here that he could, to be honest. "All right, I'm opening the connection now," Isabu announced once he was ready. As soon as he said so, Deki began running through hand seals. A set of hand seals for a jutsu Orochimaru himself would be very familiar with. The original at least. The huge metallic doors slid open and at the very same moment, Deki finished his hand seals and punched both fists forward, ice style, twin black dragon blizzard. He shouted. Drawing on the chakra armor over his torso, Deki lashed out with both of his fists, and from them, a pair of massive serpentine black dragons with glowing red eyes erupted, shooting through the air, roaring towards the opened doorway. Last time against Orochimaru, he'd made a combination jutsu with a clone who fired off the lightning style, electromagnetic murder jutsu he knew at the same time and clad the dragons in lightning chakra. This time was different though. He full-on directed the lightning from his lightning chakra mode into the black dragons. And that was not all. The sheer scope of the dragons and lightning were on another level. Before, he'd used only barest amounts of Isabu's chakra and the base cursed seal boost. Now he was using his full-on 3-tailed cloak version 1 and his upgraded heavenly star seal. The opening of the doorway connecting to Anko's sealed space was shrouded from view a split moment later as the dragons exploded, forming into a massive jet black hurricane filled with shrieking lightning. And they were not done there. At the same time Deki was unleashing his jutsu, Isabu cocked his head back, blue and red chakra swirling into existence, forming together and forming into a huge pitch black sphere in front of his face. "By Juudama!" Isabu roared. And then he fired. As soon as the tailed beast bomb made contact with the massive jet black lightning enshrouded hurricane, it too exploded, forming into a massive eruption of energy that traveled through the opening. The sheer noise coming from the detonated attacks was so loud it drowned out all else, and if Deki were not as enhanced as he was right now, the shock waves would have blown him off of his feet. This was always the plan. An alpha strike to take out the shade of Orochimaru without ever giving him a chance to fight back. Everything else were just preparations in case the alpha strike failed. Orochimaru was a slippery bastard like that after all. But, since Orochimaru was stuck inside a sealed space, a crude, rudimentary one at that, and they were the ones opening the connection, they had the advantage. And Deki and Isabu were smart guys like that, not giving their enemy a chance to fight back if they could help it. Deki himself was a true new Genin. Heh, I made a punny, he chuckled as he admired the gargantuan explosion of power that could have probably wiped out a smaller village. Honestly, he should really be looking away right now, with sunglasses and walking away. That was what the cool guys did after all. But he wouldn't give Orochimaru even the slightest tiny fraction of a chance of turning any of this around. Even if it meant he lost cool points. With his eyes active and keenly observing and his senses spread to the utmost limit, Deki, alongside Isabu, peered through the connection and waited. And waited. It took over a minute for the explosion from their attacks to die down. But when it did, and after a few moments, they were unable to sense or see anything. Anything, that is, but chakra. It's dead, Isabu announced, tension leaving his massive frame as the huge turtle Baiju lay down on his arms. I can feel the chakra the same way I did when I destroyed the one who was inside your own seal. Deki stared through the opening for a moment, before slowly, he grinned widely and rubbed his hands together eagerly. Sweet, now I can get back to my date. Booty call. Isabu corrected helpfully. That too, Deki nodded in agreement. Papa gonna get laid, tilde. Isabu rolled his eyes. Lovely. Before that though, have you decided? The Baiju asked. Do you want the chakra or do you want to give it to your booty call? Oh right, yeah. Deki pondered it for a moment, before shrugging. Give it to her. He decided. She'd suffered with the cursed seal for over a decade now, after being abandoned by Orochimaru, and had been treated with suspicion because of her connection to him for a long time, by many in the village. She ought to get something more out of it than just finally getting to use the seal for her own benefit. It wasn't long later, after Isabu had broken down Orochimaru's leftover chakra and directed it into Anko's chakra network to meld with her own and become hers, that the Genin and future Hokage returned to the conscious world. To find a purple-haired bombshell of a vixen gyrating on his lap. And not in the sexy way. Well, still in the sexy way, because Anko was just that damn sexy that most things she did, like breathing, looked erotic. But she wasn't currently trying to be sexy or grinding against him like she had before. Despite her state though, she seemed to notice his return to the waking world, despite sitting in his lap and facing away from him. What did you do? She panted out and twisted around until she was straddling him, hands grasping his shoulders tightly. If he wasn't as tough as he was, and was as puny as say a heretic to the grind and all-around squishy type ninja, it would have actually hurt. That is to say, her grip would probably creak the bones of your average genin. Her amazing, bodaciously large and perky bare tits were right in front of his eyes. But despite that, his gaze was locked with Anko's own. Her cheeks were flushed and eyes a little unfocused as she breathed out deeply, and he noticed, every moment or so, she'd shiver a bit as if a tingle were constantly running up her spine. Deki wouldn't lie, his cock throbbed back to full mast at the sight now that he was fully awake once again. His blood made a real beeline down, like a rushing tsunami wanting to swallow up an entire country. What was wrong with her? Gonna have to be a bit more specific, Deki replied, raising an eyebrow. I just did what I promised I would. I killed the Pedamaru shard inside your seal. He explained. What? She stared at him, eyes looking extra confused with how unfocused they were. But, it's not even been 5 minutes though. Well, it hadn't even taken him 30 seconds to kill the shard of Orochimaru, to be perfectly honest. Not that he blamed it for dying to that. It was practically a sitting duck with no warning of what was coming, and suddenly had a Jinchuriki cloak enhanced S-class jutsu and full-on Baiju Udama coming its way. Unless your name was Rinnegan having Haka Kunt, or you were Hashirama Senju or a Baiju yourself, there wasn't much chance of taking that head-on with no warning. I mean, I wasn't giving him any chances. I opened up the connection and me and the Sunbee blasted in our most powerful attacks and blew him the fuck up. Daki shrugged. He had no idea it was coming, and even if he did, with the amount of chakra he would have had access to, there was nothing he could have done to defend anyway. Especially not in a place where he was a sitting duck and had no cover or anywhere to run. Now if only he could get the real Orochimaru in a situation like that. Fun times for everyone. Except him. But fuck him. Anko just stared at him for a moment. I'm free. She finally muttered, sounded almost disbelieving, but then, what's this feeling going through me, and why is my chakra going so crazy? Is it because he's gone? Daki's brow furrowed. What's up with your chakra? He asked quickly. That didn't sound right at all. Nothing like that happened with him when Isabu ganked the shard that ended up inside him. It's growing rapidly, Anko panted out. Crazily so. It's already increased more than I've gained in the last 2 years of training. Ha. Oh. That must be because of Isabu passing on the shard's chakra to her like he decided on. But wait, that didn't make sense either. He never ended up like that. Sure, he felt good from it, but that was about it. He didn't look like he was drugged out of his gourd on some kind of lust-enhancing super aphrodisiac drug. Differing circumstances, even if only slightly Isabu input, while the boost is roughly the same, the difference is, your body adapted to constantly growing rapidly in chakra and as such, it didn't affect you as much. This woman had a bit less than half the amount of chakra you had before and now has grown by 1/4 of her total amount of chakra in the last few minutes after taking years to reach that point. Oh, so that was why. Chakra sensing was so useful. Sure, he could see chakra if he wanted to, but it was hard to gauge just how much someone had from sight. Sadly, he'd never be able to sense chakra that way, since he was never born a sensenin. Sometimes your idiocy astounds me, Isabu sighed. I can sense chakra. Yeah, I know, no need to rub it in, mate. Daki rolled his eyes. Not the time, man. He was just about to get his bouncy fun time on after he dealt with this. I repeat, your idiocy astounds me. Sometimes he could see in his mind's eyes, the giant turtle Baiju rolling his eye. You can use all of my abilities as my Jinchu Uriki should I allow it, and as long as you have my chakra you will be able to use them, idiot. Ha. Neat. Wait. Why did you never bring that up before, like when I was training with my summons? Daki asked, annoyed. Because it was obvious and I assumed you knew. You were training your physical senses with them, not your ability to sense chakra, Isabu replied. Seems I was wrong, honestly. Do you need me to hold your hand for everything? Daki made the very mature decision to cut off their connection and mute the huge Baiju. You realize I can just establish another connection, right, and you can't mute me? Isabu pointed out. Can't hear you, currently ignoring you. Daki replied. Isabu cut the connection with a snort. Yeah, he better run. Shaking his head, Daki put the conversation on the back burner, mentally adding another form of training to his mental grind list before focusing back on Anko. Yeah, that's my fault, the teen told her, a big smirk splaying across his face as he traced one hand up her delightfully full and curvy hip to cup one of her huge, soft breasts and squeeze it lightly. The chakra from Pedamaru's shard was still lingering. I coulda took it myself, but I gave it to you for a decent increase to your chakra. You're welcome, by the way. She leaned into his tuff, a soft mule leaving her lips as he toyed with her nipple, and he wasn't going to lie. He felt like a king in this moment. Anko stared at him through half-lidded eyes, before slowly a smirk spread across her own face. You were already getting to fuck me as much as you want for dealing with the cursed seal for me, you didn't have to give me anything else. She pointed out. Oh, I know, and I definitely plan on taking advantage of that. Daki licked his lips eagerly, letting go of her breast to reach down, alongside his other hand, and slip his hands up her skirt and take hold of her full ass cheeks, greedily molding his fingers into the spongy flesh, and pulled her into him while grinding his crotch against hers, making sure she got a good feel for the weapon he had waiting for her. I just figured a little more chakra would help you keep going for longer, so I don't wear you out too fast, like with Kyoinai. So you want to hear me scream about how amazing and big your dick is and not just squeal like a pig? Anko asked crudely, with a laugh. Something like that, Daki responded, swallowing heavily in an effort to not just mount her that very second, though you'll do plenty of squealing. So don't worry about that. He promised. Bet. Her smirk widened, before she swooped down and caught his lips with her own, squishing her fat, soft tits against his chest. This time she took initiative of the kiss first, spearing her long tongue into his mouth and wrapping around his own. She'd learned from their first exchange and his wrestling hers into submission. She was still very new to it though. And he wasn't the type to let the woman set the pace. One of his hands left her ass, and he trailed his finger up her spine, crackles of electricity sparking across from the tips of his fingers into her back. She moaned into his mouth, back arching involuntarily, and his hand reaching the apex of her back, trailed up her neck to her hair, where he fisted his fingers into her spiky ponytail and roughly used it to press her lips harder against his own. It stunned her enough for him to easily take control, his tongue wrestling her longer, slender one down into submission and allowing him to lead the kiss. Anko shook against him, moaning into his mouth as she began grinding her hips into his own, rubbing and gyrating against his hard cock. He let go of her hair then, sparks fizzing into existence around his digits once more as he trailed it down her front, squeezing one of her breasts and teasing her pink nipple, before slipping it down into the front of her skirt. He found her slit easily and already could feel gushing dampness dripping out continuously. Oh, fuck. Anko pulled back and bit out as he teased her womanhood with one finger. He slipped it inside her gently and she stilled on his lap, before moaning audibly and rocking back and forth, riding his finger. You really don't waste any time, do you, horny brat? Anko guffawed and moaned at the same time. In response, he slipped another finger inside. She moaned louder. In his defense, she was a tough girl, she could take it. And he wasn't here to make love with Anko. He was here to absolutely wreck her and fuck her silly. Ride her like a pony, as was promised. He was just nice enough to get her ready first. If she was Kyoinai, he wouldn't have been this nice about it and just bent that slut over and went to town on her ass. But being Anko and not Kyoinai, didn't change the fact she wasn't his girlfriend. He fingered her with both fingers for a few moments, letting her adjust to what it felt like having his fingers inside. Her moist womanhood clenching around his fingers was nice for sure, she was super tight. And super responsive. And then he added his little electricity trick and she went absolutely wild, spasming on him as her insides clenched down on his fingers like a vice. And she absolutely soaked his pants. The purple-haired woman rode out her orgasm, back ramrod straight for a good few seconds, before slumping forward and collapsing against him, head hanging over his shoulder. Have a good ride then. He gave a barking laugh, before nipping her ear with his teeth. Anko shivered, before chuckling softly, as if me moaning like some back alley whore wasn't proof enough. Gotta twist it in a. She replied, before leaning down and biting his shoulder and running her tongue over his skin. "It's good for my ego to hear you admit it though." The teen grinned wildly. Very good for his ego, in fact. He was sure Isabu would have made a sarcastic snipe right about now over that fact, if he wasn't in the middle of getting his bouncy fun time on. He was a polite guy like that. He toyed with her body as she recovered, freely exploring her slim-toned stomach, her full bouncy backside and massive, soft perky tits. "Ah, you're way too good at this." Anko's groan ended with a squeal as he jolted a tiny bit of sparks through her nipples. Glad to see his training wasn't without merit. He'd have to thank Kyoinai for being a good test dummy in the future by letting her crawl back into his bed for a repeat performance. Anko pushed herself up off of him, legs shaky and jelly-like, and stood before him. "Fuck it, let's get right down to the meat of this shit, kid," she voiced, hands going to her skirt and unfastening the belt that kept it up. Not that it really needed one with how it practically molded against her curves. "Fine with me." Daiki eagerly agreed and touched his hand quickly to his clothes. They disappeared a moment later, sealed within his palm seal and leaving him utterly bare. With the cloth prison confining it gone, his cock rose fully into the air, bobbing menacingly, powerfully, intimidatingly, almightily. Need some more grand adjectives? Isabu couldn't help but scoff. "Ah yes, grandly that fit too. 5 to round it up nicely." His menacingly, powerful, intimidating, grand almighty cock was freed from its prison and radiated a power Manda could only dream of. "Shit, I almost forgot how fucking massive that thing is." Anko bit her lip as he eyed his manhood, fiddling with her belt. "Never seen one that big before, not even close, that's for sure." Daiki grasped his cock by the base and gave it a lazy stroke, as he pointed the tip at Anko as if it were a weapon. "Thought you were a virgin and never done anything with any other guys?" he asked. He honestly didn't care if she had fucked other guys before, or well, in her case, done some preludes up to sex since she was a virgin. But he'd be quick to show her who was superior. "I ain't." Anko shrugged as he pulled her belt free. "I work in T&I though, remember. How many prisoners do you think we've had to strip down? And let me tell you, a lot of guys are quick to talk when you began dicing up their cocks like cucumbers." Yeah, well, he didn't blame them. Poor fuckers. And it was a good thing he wasn't a normal guy, otherwise his cock might have deflated a tad at hearing this woman he was about to fuck talk about cutting up other guys' cocks to get information out of them. Anko unbuttoned her skirt and went to pull it down, but before she could, Daiki spoke up. "Turn around." Her ordered her. "Oh." She raised an eyebrow at him challengingly. "Turn around," Daiki repeated, grinning at her. "I wanna see that ass of yours when you take that skirt off." She held his gaze for a moment, before grinning back and doing as he told her. She turned around, showing off shelf of an ass stretching out her skirt, before bending over and sliding it down her hips. Daiki's cock pulsed as he saw her bare ass, covered in nothing except for some fishnet armor shorts that soon joined the skirt pooling at her ankles, and showing off her full, bare ass cheeks to him. Leaning forward from where he was sitting, Daiki lashed out with his hand and spanked her across the ass, her cheeks ripping and jiggling from the blow. Anko jumped a bit at the sudden smack, before looking over her shoulder at him, cheeks flushed and gaze heated. "You ain't gentle at all," she purred. "Ha, daddy. What gave you the idea I was gonna be?" He laughed, ignoring the thrill that ran through him at her calling him daddy. Her thighs rubbed together, even as she turned around fully to face him, showing off her fully nude body, pink nipples puffy and slit dripping. "So how we doing this then?" she asked then, bowing to his. It was his reward after all. Still, that didn't mean he should just rush into it. While she was pretty wet already by his reckoning, if he just did what he did with Genin with her, he was more than likely going to hurt her. And not in the fun way. A little prep work would go a long way to get her ready and make breaking her in all the more fun. He planned on making sure she came crawling back for more. "Come sit in Daddy's lap." Daki grinned, patting his naked thigh. She eyed his cock for a moment, pointing straight up, before grinning right back and sashaying over. "If that's what my big dick daddy wants," Anko purred, making a show of fluttering her eyelashes at him. She straddled him a moment later, arms wrapping around his neck lightly and her full, perky soft ass cheeks taking up residence on his thighs. His cock was pressed up against her stomach, sandwiched between the pair of them, reaching well above her navel. The two of them stared into each other's eyes, matching grins on their faces, before Daki leaned forward, catching her lips with his own. He probed her lips with his tongue, and Anko opened her mouth, allowing him access. At the same time, one hand cupped one of her large, soft breasts, while the other trailed down between them, to her slit and trailed along her entrance. He focused on his chakra, and a moment later, his fingers on both hands sparked with low-voltage electricity. He pinched her nipple at the same time he spread her slit open gently with two fingers and began to finger her. "MMMF." Anko moaned loudly into his mouth, her confident smoky eyes going wide with shock, and she bucked like a bronco in his lap. With the Shinkugan, it was oh so easy to find the best spots to play with a woman, the best erogenous zones to make them really feel it and stimulate them beyond the norm with his lightning chakra, making them more sensitive and susceptible to pleasure. In fact, if he wanted to, from one hand he could spread his lightning chakra through Anko's entire body and stimulate every single erogenous zone she had at once. Genin very much couldn't handle it and practically blacked out. So it was probably a bit too much for a virgin to handle straight off the bat. Especially since she was already so responsive with him just fingering her slowly with two fingers and tweaking one of the puffy nipples on her chest. It didn't take long before he felt her wet folds clench down atop his fingers like a vice. "Fuck. Fuck. Fuck." Anko pulled away from the kiss and cursed over and over as she rode his fingers' first orgasm rapidly approaching. "That's it." Daki hissed, grin widening, his fingering speed picking up lightly. "Gonna come for daddy." "Cocky, little." Anko huffed out through gritted teeth as she tried to contain her erotic, husky moans. Having such a strong, confident older woman moaning for him, gave the teenager such a high. In response, he gave her a clit little zap, but only for a split moment. It was enough to make her yelp and clench down even more, her full sexy hips rolling against his hand as she tried to ride his fingers to orgasm almost instinctually. "Fuck." Anko moaned, only to still a bit as Daki stopped moving his fingers and allowed the electricity over his digits to fade. "What are you doing?" Anko gave a ragged gasp and glared down at him. "I was so close," she said, hips still humping against him wantonly. "Say it," Daki ordered her simply. Anko growled, but for all her femme fatale alpha bitch attitude, she was well aware of who was in control here and now. "Fine," she bit out, giving a shuddering breath before leaning forward, squishing her huge soft breasts against his chest and giving a whimpering moan. "Please please make me come, daddy Good girl." He laughed and lightning sparked across the fingers within her, as he began fingering her once again, but this time allowing the electricity to spread across the expanse of her wet womanhood, stimulating all her nerves and even spreading to her clit. Ofua Anko gave an explosive moan that transitioned into a full-on scream as he trailed his other hand down her back, before full-on spanking her on one of her fully bouncy round ass cheeks and taking a great big handful. She came hard, her voice reverberating throughout the household and so loud she may even be heard outside. That is if the Uchiha district wasn't a ghost town these days. It took a good 2 minutes for Anko to ride out her explosive orgasm, and when she finally died, she collapsed against him, head hanging over his shoulder. "Holy fuck, kid!" the purple-haired woman gasped out. He was tempted to make a joke about being a god with that comment. But that was below him. Just like Anko was going to be in a few minutes, in fact. "Have fun then." Daiki grinned, leaning his head over a bit to nip at her ear and making the older woman shiver as he ground his fat, throbbing cock into her stomach. "Like you couldn't tell already, huh, daddy?" Anko snorted, before biting his shoulder lightly and swiveling her tongue over his skin. "Hey, I think you're nice and ready for me now, right?" Daiki added, speaking softly into her ear as he nipped it gently with his teeth. Though he may have sounded calm, he was about at his limit of holding back. "Honestly, I could do with a few minutes to get feeling back in my legs." Anko chuckled. Pride suffused Daiki's chest, but, even still, he wasn't willing to wait all that much longer. "Don't worry about it," he assured her, pulling back from her ear, and easing his fingers out of her womanhood, drawing a gasp from her. "I'll do all the work for now." His fingers, slick with her juices, joined their counterparts in sinking into the bouncy, doughy cheeks of Anko's bodacious ass. And with his grip on her ass cheeks, Daiki lifted the older woman into the air, her slit hanging directly above his flared cock head. "Shit, you really do show no mercy, huh?" Anko groaned, "Even to the bitches you fuck." "Didn't we already go over that before?" Daiki laughed, though he wouldn't say it wasn't hot. She already considered herself a bitch he was fucking. With his sheer strength, it was easy to lift the woman and keep her balanced there mid-air for a moment as he angled her perfectly. To lower down onto his fat knob end. "Oh fuck." Anko groaned as his cockhead spread her pussy open and eased inside. Fuck, she was tight. It felt like a fucking industrial vice that could pinch through sheets of iron was clamping down on his cock. It made him idly wonder, if he was a human from his other self's world, would her pussy crush his cock into paste or snap it right off? Kyoinai was tight to him, but nowhere near this tight. It took him a good few seconds before he bottomed out, and even then, there were still a few good inches or more that couldn't fit all the way in. "Shit, I can feel you're pressing against my womb." Anko huffed out, giving him a strained lip-bitten grin. "You're about to feel a lot more." Daiki promised and lifted her up slowly after giving her a few moments to adjust to the feeling of having her virginity taken by him, dragging the walls of her velvety wet pussy along his rigid cock. And then he brought her down, faster than he did initially. The clap of her ass cheeks, of her full luscious ass cheeks slapping against his thighs, reverberated loudly throughout the room, accompanied by a strangled gasping moan. And then he didn't give her time to gain her bearings. He wanted to hear more of those unwanted gasps, the short sharp squeals emanating from her lips, the throaty moans that made his cock pulse. He didn't go full on out like he did with Kyoinai, but Anko was tough, so he was able to shift into a decent pace as he bounced her up and down on his cock. MMFF. Anko breathed heavily, cheeks flushed. "Shit, so fucking big." Her words and her face were so hot. But what made it even sexier, were her fat juicy tits bouncing in his face with each pass of his cock. "You like that?" Daiki asked, slamming her down on his dick a bit harder and grinding his meat inside her. Anko moaned, "You already know I do, you monster-cocked brat." The purple-haired special Jonin replied, wiggling her hips as she tried to swallow more of his cock with her juicy wet pussy, as if me moaning like a two-bit Iowa whore isn't enough to know that. Ah ah ah. Daki tsked, and let go of her ass with one hand, only to sharply spank her and take another great big greedy handful. "That's daddy to you." "Shit." Anko cursed, biting her lip. She looked down at him, giving him a half pleasure-filled grimace and half cocky grin. "Fucking make me say it then, brat." And she had no problem calling him it earlier. "Well, nothing for it." Anko moaned as Daki abruptly stood up, carrying the woman by her ass cheeks. He was about to say something when a wild idea came to mind. He let go of her, the only part of him keeping her up being his cock. She wobbled midair a bit, before instinctually her arms wrapped around his neck once more and her legs wrapped around his waist and she hung off of his frame, her hips rising up and down of her own accord on his cock. God, she felt good. With how she spasmed and clung to his cock with those velvet walls of hers, if he let go, her pussy would be quick to milk a fat white load out of him. "MMMF, bastard." Anko moaned, even as she fucked herself on his cock, hips wiggling with desire. Time to take this to the bed where he could have some real fun with her. Daki began walking, making his way out of the living room, through the hallways and towards his bedroom. Each step he took had Anko moaning and holding on for all she was worth. Despite all her strength and power, the woman was little more than a moaning limpet at the moment after what he'd done to her with his lightning. He stopped in front of his king-size bed. "You're about to learn why they call me Daki Thundercock," he warned the woman hanging on his dick. "Nobody calls you that, you just came up with that right there." Isabu deadpanned. And was ignored. Tilde what? Anko gave him an unfocused look. An unfocused look that immediately turned into a wide-eyed, open-mouthed scream as he let loose his lightning. From his cock. He shrouded it in a low-voltage armor of static that spread throughout her entire womanhood and stimulated the entirety of her folds. Almost immediately, her pussy walls clamped down on him even tighter as she came once again, explosively. But Daki wasn't done. He ground his teeth together and forced himself not to come as he reached down and hooked his arms under her thighs and forced them apart, before tipping them both over and pinning the voluptuous purple-haired woman to the bed, forcing her legs up as he positioned her beneath him in a mating press. And then he truly let loose and began to hammer into her with his cock, fucking her into his bed with his lightning-clad cock. Ooh. Anko's voice came out in one long unending moaning scream of pleasure, her cunt constantly twitching and writhing around his manhood as her eyes rolled up into the back of her head and her tongue lolled out of her lips limply. She was sporting the second goofiest hegao he'd ever seen. The top spot belonged to Genin, which was just more motivation for him to make hers reach first place. And soon the racket of his bed frame slamming against the wall hard enough to reverberate throughout the entire large household and beyond began. The next morning, as the dawn came and the sun rose up bit by bit into the sky, found Daki sitting on the edge of his bed. Lewd, wet slurping sounds echoed throughout the room, bouncing off the walls. Between his legs, the naked, voluptuous form of Anko had her lips wrapped around the fat head of his cock, as her hands slowly stroked up and down the rigid manhood, and she worshipped his balls with her tongue. Only possible thanks to how long she could make her tongue. It was a novel blowjob for sure, way better than Genin had given him. Granted, he'd given her quite a bit of coaching, all night long. "That's it." Daki gave a lip-bitten grin, hand fisted in her hair, no longer held up in her typical spiky ponytail. Good girl, he praised. Anko popped her lips off of his cockhead and looked up at him, giving him a tired, but dry gaze. You know, I'm not a dog brat. She rolled her eyes, but even as she did, she pressed her lips against his cockhead once more and gave it a smooch as she held his gaze. Coulda fooled me, Daki laughed, what with how I made you my bitch last night and all. Despite her confident demeanor even now, Anko shuddered in remembrance. He had stayed true to his word and fucked her all night long. She had much more stamina than Kuinai, so despite it being her first time, once she adjusted to getting fucked by his cock and adapted to it after getting healed a few times to speed up the process, she lasted much longer. Which wasn't actually half as impressive as that sounded, because all it meant was that she got fucked for longer and in more positions by him, from traditional average positions like missionary, to straight up full Nelson in front of a mirror where he made her watch as her face twisted up into goofy fucked silly expressions as he bounced her on his dick. Cocky fucker. Anko huffed at him, but didn't stop worshipping his cock with her lips. That I am, Daki agreed with a shit-eating grin as the older woman lathering his cock with her saliva, but as she did, he cast a look out of the window, chakra focusing within his eyes and sighed, though, it's about time I get a move on. Anko raised an eyebrow at him, even as she opened her lips and began bobbing her head up and down on his dick. I need to head over to see the old man soon, Daki explained, easing his grip on the woman's hair and gently raking his fingers through her purple tresses. My training with him begins today. Not that his training ever ended, even when he was in the process of fucking Anko, his clones were diligently going at it and through the night quite a few had popped, giving him their memories, well, more like a few hundred, and the mastery of 4 of the earth jutsu he'd pilfered from those rock humpers in the forest of death. Anko pulled her lips from his cock with a loud, wet sloppy pop sound and shook her head. Man, it really is surreal, she sighed, when you say that, it really hammers in that a cocky little arrogant punk like you is next in line to be Hokage. Daki shrugged, he was right there with her on that matter. He could hardly believe it either, the crap that old man got from Kusa to smoke must have been some real good shit. Hey now, insulting your future Hokage like that is probably a crime, the teenager replied, wagging his finger at the woman between his legs. I could punish you for that, you know. Oh no. Anko gave him a totally deadpan reply, whatever will I do? The pervy next Hokage is angry at me, he'll probably dress me up in some slutty costume and fuck me all night long. Oh wait, that already happened and I liked it. Heh. I didn't dress you up in a slutty costume, he pointed out, though your usual outfit counts for the slutty part for sure. I don't see you denying that you'd like to dress me up in a different one though. Anko smirked at him. And the floor is made of floor. Daki rolled his eyes back at her, as if I would. Though I wonder what would look best on you. Maybe a bunny costume, or a harem girl outfit. He mused. Want me to feed you grapes while you lounge in a throne while I'm at it? Anko asked, raising an eyebrow at him. Sounds good to me. He shrugged. With that said though, he stood up and stretched out his arms, his large, naked ballsack dangling directly in front of Anko's face. The woman whistled as she looked up at his towering cock. Damn, you know, seeing it from this angle makes me wonder how I took that monster all night long. She chuckled lightly. He grasped his cock around the base at her words, before slapping it against her forehead. You're just built different. Daki praised, his smirk returning. While he was hard still, it wasn't that long ago he deposited a load in the woman beneath him. It sucked he couldn't blow another all over her face and tits right now, but it would take too long. Fuck yeah, I am. Anko's own smirk widened, and she crossed her arms under her huge naked tits proudly, and don't you forget it. He wanted to wreck her again and blow out her back, again. But, as much as he wanted to, the grind came first. Orgasms were temporary, but the grind was eternal. Right then, I'm hitting up a shower before heading out, Daiki told her. You wanna join me? I would, but I still can't feel my legs. Anko shrugged. I'll just get one when I can walk in a straight line again and head home. Daiki rolled his eyes before reaching down and grasping the woman under her armpits and hefting her up. What are you? Anko began to ask in surprise, before giving a yelp as he tossed her onto the bed, landing face first on his pillow, back arched into the air. Face down, ass up, that's the way we like to fuck. Daiki couldn't help but remember the line of a song from his other life as he eyed her. And my god, was it tempting to just get on the bed and rail her bouncy round ass silly again. But the grind came first. You can stay here and sleep it off, no rush. He assured her. It wasn't like he had anything to fear from her in his house alone, anything possibly damning was kept in his palm seals. And Isabu had his little clone lounging in the pond still, who kept track of things when he was out. Well, it's comfier than my bed, Anko admitted, her voice muffled by the pillow. You sure you're not just saying that so when you get back you can just plow me again? She asked, wiggling her full ass at him. That would be a solid idea, he nodded, if I were planning on coming back anytime soon. He probably wouldn't be back home for a good few days. He'd most likely be at where he was gonna train with the old man and getting the most out of it, and would just sleep there outside to maximize his training time. If he slept at all, that was. You're a weird kid, you know that. Anko turned her head to give him an odd glance. I do, he shrugged. She wasn't wrong. But, he wasn't just going to leave things like that with her. He walked around the bed to stand by her side and grasped his cock at the base, before slapping it against her lips. Now give daddy a kiss goodbye. Anko snorted, but she did so anymore, giving his dick a big wet sloppy smooch. Bye bye daddy, Tilda, she cooed at him. Have a good time getting beat up by an old man. I will, thank you. Daiki replied, before spanking her across her bubbly round ass clad with static electricity, drawing a squeal from the woman before moving on to go have a shower and get ready. After having a shower and a quick breakfast, Daiki returned to his bedroom to find Anko fast asleep, in the position he left her in. She snored loudly. Very unladylike. Rolling his eyes, the teenager eased her into a laying down position and pulled the covers over her, before proceeding to get ready and leaving his home behind for the time being. The crisp morning air felt good on his skin and brushing through his hair. Konoha wasn't exactly cloud or mist temperature-wise, the coldest of the 5 great villages, but it wasn't exactly sun either, and nearing the latter half of the year now, mornings and days like this would become more common. Daiki couldn't say he disliked it at all. In fact, it reminded him of the place his other self lived. It was a place with a colder climate than average, so crisp mornings were quite common. It's a good day. Daiki mused. The cold air sharpened his senses, which would be good for training with Old Man Hokage. The cold didn't bother him anyway. He left his home behind and hopped up onto the roof of a nearby building before traveling via roof hopping towards the Hokage Tower. The general populace of the village was just beginning their day, and the hubbub of it all became a gentle backdrop in his ears. It was nice and peaceful. A peace that wouldn't last and would be wholly ruined in the coming years if the Akatsuki, Obito, Madara or Kaguya got their way. It was going to be his job one day, at most a few years away, possibly only a month away, to protect this peace. Despite the fun and enjoyable time he'd had with Anko, a familiar weight seemed to form over his shoulders. "Don't worry about it," Isabu spoke up, "it's just another weight for you to grind under until you can shoulder it easily, just like any other weight." His lips quirked up. "Yeah, you're right. And it wasn't like he was shouldering that weight alone. And his big ol' turtle bro had some real massive shoulders. I mean, if we're being technical, I don't really have shoulders," Isabu pointed out, drawing a snort from the teen. Not long later, he arrived at the Hokage Tower. He spotted the old man right away as he approached. He was standing atop the tower, overlooking the village. "Good morning, Daki-kun," the old man greeted him, glancing at the teen from the corner of his eye as he lightly puffed on his pipe. "Did you have a good sleep and get well rested for today?" "Nope," Daki shrugged. "I spent all night having fun with Anko, if you know what I mean, old man." "Huh?" The old man grinned around his pipe. "Is that too? You're quite the lucky lad, aren't you? Are you trying to make your sensei jealous?" "Ha," he was already referring to himself as his sensei. "I'm just built different, old man." Daki shrugged and crossed his arms. "Speaking of sexy ladies though, how was that old lady Koharu in bed back in the day when she was a hottie?" "I wouldn't know personally," Sarutobi shrugged, "though I'm told she was quite the minx if Hashirama-sama's words are anything to buy." Daki blinked. "Wait, what? She banged the first?" Daki couldn't help but gape at the old man. "Quite a few people did actually," Sarutobi chuckled. "Hashirama-sama was a bit of a dog, you could say. Many women lusted after him and he indulged quite a bit in it." "Damn, the first Hokage was a player. Respect. So I'm not the first one who thought of using the Hokage position to get laid." Daki realized. Wait, wasn't he married? Yes he was. He was a lucky man indeed, Sarutobi mused with a nod, puffing on his pipe. "Mito-sama was quite kinky is the word, I believe." "Wow, the more you learned, man." "Mind blown. You know, the Uzumaki really do sound crazy sometimes." Daki shook his head. "I wonder how Naruto's mom stacked up." He intentionally dropped. The Sundame side-eyed him thoughtfully. "So you even know that?" He mused. "You realize that's an S-class secret, correct? About as much as Naruto being the Kyuubi Jinchuriki, right?" Daki snorted. "Come on, it's not like she's not in the records and closely associated to the Yondaime Hokage in them, always on missions with him. And she was the only Uzumaki in the records during that time period, and with Naruto basically being a carbon copy of the Yondaime, anyone with a brain could put it together." He had actually confirmed that pretty early on, just for an excuse when he brought this kind of thing up. Kushina Uzumaki wasn't hard at all to find in the records. Her mission count, her ninja registration number, etc., it was all there at the Shinobi library. "You'd be surprised how few have made the connection actually," Sarutobi pointed out. "As for Kushina herself, she was something all right, that was for sure." "That's for sure," Daki agreed. "The Yondaime was a lucky guy. Given a chance I'd be all over that red-headed babe." "Never tell Naruto that," Sarutobi responded dryly. "Hey man, if Naruto was a chick, I'd be all over her too." Daki shrugged. "As a girl, Naruto is a hottie. Gotta be the Uzumaki genes, man. Probably the real reason why those ugly fuckers from Cloud, Stone and shit teamed up to wipe them out." "Then I'm sure we can all be glad Naruto is a boy." Then the old man snorted. "The last thing we need is an angry female Jinchuriki because she caught the boy she likes hitting on other girls like you do." Well, he wasn't wrong. When the joking conversation died down, Hiruzen turned to Daki. "Are you ready?" he asked. I wouldn't be here if I wasn't old man. Deki responded, smirk fading as his lips pressed into a thin line, serious mode going into effect. Good, because we don't have a whole lot of time. Hiruzen nodded, I won't be going easy on you at all, he said, placing his hand on Deki's shoulder. And it was then the boy noticed. His pipe was gone. He hadn't noticed. When did he? That thought didn't get much time to process as the old man's chakra enveloped him and he was brought along via Shunshin. Fast. Deki noticed. He could barely keep track of their surroundings as the old man transported him along with the jutsu. Even with his heavenly star seal and three-tailed cloak together, he'd be hard-pressed to keep up. It would be another thing if he could use lightning chakra mode reliably with them in his physical body, but that was currently impossible for him. Moments later, it ended, and Deki noticed that they were standing atop the Hokage monument. Why are we? Deki began asking, looking around. But he never got to finish his question as the elderly Hokage brought his hands together into a single seal and the ground rumbled beneath their feet. Deki blinked and stared as the ground rumbled and part of it began to slide away, revealing a staircase that led into the mountain itself. What the? The teen gave the old man an odd look. How was that there? He'd looked at the mountain plenty of times with his Shinkugan. It was pretty hard not to seeing how big it was, but he'd never saw anything like this. At his baffled look, Hiruzen gave him a light grin. I see there are things even you haven't been able to see even with those eyes of yours, he noted, knowingly. His tone implied he knew why he hadn't seen it before either. The old man gestured for him to follow him down into the stairs, and Deki did so, the opening sliding shut once more as Sarutobi made the same hand seal he did previously once they were both inside. For a moment, they were both in pitch black darkness, before everything lit up. Glowing blue lights traveling down the walls on either side of the staircase lighting the area up. What is this place? Deki asked as the old man began walking down the stairs and followed behind him. I should think that would be quite obvious. Consider what you're here for, the Hokage chuckled, but to clarify and speed things up, the Hokage needs somewhere private to train as well, to not become rusty, to become stronger and keep up appearances all in one. Getting stronger and not getting rusty, he could understand that. But the other, not so much, keep up appearances? He asked. Sarutobi looked over his shoulder at Deki and gave him an almost mischievous look. I'll give you a hint. When the tree leaves dance, one shall find flames. The fire's shadow will illuminate the village. A poem, or a haiku? Honestly, he wasn't very well versed in either, so he couldn't tell. But he'd heard those words before, from the very same man in another life. As he died. And he was using it as a riddle for him. A test. Seriously. Deki gave him a deadpan gaze. Sarutobi chuckled again. I'm sure it sounds like hogwash to a young man like yourself, but there is great meaning in this phrase, and in fact, it's only half of it, he replied. It is a saying created by Hashirama Sama himself and is passed down from Hokage to their chosen successors. Wait, what? But didn't he say it to Orochimaru as he died? No, wait, or was he just thinking it? It was hard to remember that part, especially clearly to remember if it was talking aloud or thought. Well, whatever. Fine, I'll play your game, old man. Deki rolled his eyes. The leaf finding fire is obviously the one that is going to become Hokage. And the Hokage is the one that illuminates the village, so I guess a beacon everyone is drawn to and gathers around. Or use that light to lead them or something. Yes, that's correct. The old man nodded, proudly. Why though? It wasn't exactly some hard riddle, it was pretty straightforward. For reference, the full quote is, "When the tree leaves dance, one shall find flames. The fire's shadow will illuminate the village, and once again, tree leaves shall bud anew." The older man revealed, "You were near spot on, only missing one thing. The Hokage is also the pillar that supports the village. Their strength and leadership must be seen as infallible, and inspire the belief that as long we are here, there is no greater defender for them and their loved ones." Deki stared blankly at the man's back for a moment, pondering those words, before it clicked for him. This place is super private, so nobody can possibly see any mistakes the Hokage make when training. He realized, it's so nobody can see that the Hokage isn't actually infallible and invincible. "That is correct." Deki-kun Sarutobi paused and looked back at him with a warm, beaming smile on his elderly face. "We are strong, yes, but we are not gods. Yet, we must cultivate such an image when it comes to strength, to provide the support the new leaves need to bud and flourish to their greatest heights. That is what it means to be Hokage, the fire shadow that illuminates the leaf village. It is to be the pillar that supports the village and the undefeatable sentinel that will guard the village against any and all opponents, even if it costs our lives." Deki fell silent at the man's words, and from there, followed him down deeper into the Hokage mountain without a word. He was thinking on the man's words. He understood it all, and the point, and even why it was necessary. But it was just so contradictory. Take the Yondaime Hokage for instance. Namikaze Minato was an incredible shinobi and powerful beyond words. People treated him like he really was a god and spoke of him in awe to this day, over a decade since his death. But he wasn't invincible. He wasn't even close to infallible. He was freaking dead after all and left his only son to fend for himself. Yet, people acted as if him actually dying didn't detract from that all. Fucking hell, even in the academy not even a year ago, there were girls in his class gushing over pictures of him and wanting to marry him, when he was fucking dead. Humans as a whole are a contradictory species, Isabu mused, piping in. You speak of love and peace, yet readily wage war and commit atrocities in the same breath. You look down up murderers and thieves, yet have made a profession out of them that dominates the world. You yourself are terrified and find yourself lacking in too many ways to count, but brag and boast louder than anyone else of your greatness." Deki grimaced. He couldn't even think of anything to say in response that. After all, that was the ugliest part of being human. And the ugliest part who he was. His very identity was an illusion that he made himself believe in. And to be Hokage, it seemed, was to make that illusion your reality. When he thought about it like that, maybe Naruto wasn't wrong at any point in his path at all. The blonde constantly lied to himself and lived an illusion, buried his rage, despair and hatred into a deep dark corner and hid it away from anyone and everyone. The only one who knew the true Naruto for the longest time was Kurama. Just like only I know the true Deki, Isabu added with a wistful sigh, kind of ironic when you think about it. Considering you're practically the direct opposite of him, and well, I am the polite sibling as I've said multiple times now, while Kurama is the most violent, rude and gruff among us, but also the most damaged. Deki wasn't sure how to reply to that. You don't need to, Isabu pointed out. That's your biggest problem, Deki, and the biggest source of stress in your life. You always think you need something to respond with, or a counter. Sometimes, the best course of action is to say or do nothing at all. Deki opened his mouth, before pausing. If he replied, he would just prove his point. Not what I meant at all, Isabu sighed, but baby steps I suppose. He didn't get much time to ponder on the Baiju's words, because finally, after minutes of walking down the stairway, they reached the bottom. It opened up into a large cavern area. And by large, he meant massive. It had to span the length and width of the entire mountain. And it wasn't exactly empty either. There were rows upon rows of weapons from swords, to maces, to even staves lining the cavern walls, huge training posts at one side of the huge area, and at the far end of the room he could see what looked to be a massive pond, with a huge tree growing up out of it. And behind it, he could see a door leading into some other area. Honestly, how the hell had he not noticed something this massive underneath the mountain? It was as he looked around the room though, he noticed it. Familiar scrawls of ink over the walls. Seals. He couldn't recognize most of the patterns, but some of it was similar to a few things he knew. Specifically, barrier seals. He muttered aloud. That's right, Daiki-kun. Sarutobi nodded. This is the personal training area for the Hokage. It was created by Hashirama-sama with the help of his wife Mito-sama. Ah, that explained it. Playboy Kage and his kinky Uzumaki wife, this was definitely something he could see coming from them. And it explained the stupid huge tree growing out of the underground pond as well. Where there was no sunlight, yet it looked healthier than most trees he saw outside the village. This Daiki-kun is where we'll be spending our time training over the next 8 days. Sarutobi gestured to the wide expanse of the training cavern. I will of course not be able to spend all my time here with you, and will have to often leave to take care of my duties, but for the next 8 days, you will not be leaving this area. Well, good thing he had already planned ahead for that kind of thing, even if it was actually going to be longer than he thought. His Dimension 4 seal was always stacked with food that would keep for a while just in case he went on a training binge after all. Though it did bring up the actual questions, what if he hadn't been prepared already? What about eating, or pissing and shitting for that matter? The Genin asked. In response the old man gestured to the door behind the pond. That area behind that door is a small living space, it has everything you'd need, the older man replied. There is a bed, basic medical supplies, food, and of course a toilet with plumbing. There was fucking plumbing down here. How? Daiki asked, raising an eyebrow at the man. Fuinjutsu, how else my boy? Sarutobi laughed, and then placed his right hand on his chest and his left hand on his left leg. Speaking of seals though, I believe it is time we get down to business, no? As he said that, his Hokage robes shifted and disappeared, leaving him clad in nothing but a familiar full black outfit, the Hokage hat disappearing the same way a second later and being replaced by a black hooded helmet. Daiki blinked. Wait, huh? He gaped. I must admit, your storage seal is very useful. The old man mused with a grin. This motherfucker stole his jutsu. Well really, it was just an augmented storage seal really, but come on, that was his thing. Why you Uchiha? Daiki spluttered, such was his surprise. I mean, how many jutsu have you stole from others? Isabu pointed out dryly, pot meat kettle, you're both black. Hope you like the video. Like, share and subscribe the channel for more such videos. Tell me your recommendation in the comment section down below. Thanks for watching.